Chapter 1899. What Zhang Yan entered the modern world this time wasn't his original body, it was just a sliver of consciousness. In reality, after cultivating to the realm of immeasurable and boundless, the boundary between spiritual energy and consciousness was blurred. There was actually no difference between the two. You can think of it as spiritual energy, but you can also think of it as consciousness. The effects are all the same. As for himself, after he jumped out of the restraints of the modern world, he no longer needed to be restrained by the river of the modern world. However, he couldn't search for Tao in the eternal silence, so he had to enter the world to find it. As his power sunk in, he felt a few forces repelling him. However, they weren't in harmony with each other, they were also fighting against each other. He knew that these were the Wei of the refined spirit realm cultivators. He immediately used his qi to resist and tried to stop his own power here. Like a rock on the ocean, no matter how strong the wind and the waves were, he wouldn't budge. If the opponent personally poured his power here, then he naturally wouldn't be able to stop it. Now that he was at his weakest, he could fight. However, the moment he collided with those forces, he suddenly felt that some sort of change had occurred to his own power during the collision. Before, he had thought that his spiritual energy was endless. Then how should he determine who was strong and who was weak in the refined spirit realm? Now, he finally understood that the so-called strong and weak here was actually just a comparison. If you can suppress other refined spirit realm cultivators, then you are naturally strong. If you are suppressed by other refined spirit realm cultivators, then you are naturally the weaker side. Here, the strong and the weak weren't constant. Because the clashes between refined spirit realm cultivators were ongoing, no one could suppress everyone else. Therefore, the strong weren't always strong and the weak weren't always weak. The strong could become weak and the weak could become strong. If there really was one person who suppressed everyone else and he was the only one left, then the strong and the weak wouldn't matter anymore. Now, after clashing time and time again, his power was subconsciously transforming, making him closer and closer to that person. In the end, though his power didn't move at all, on the surface, there wasn't much of a difference. This was a huge change. It was a leap in his nature. At this moment, he was enlightened. Although they were all independent individuals, from a general perspective, they could be seen as a whole. Because of this, even though their powers were opposed to each other, they were also connected. Since he had joined this battle, he needed to be a part of it first. Not only did he prove it himself, but it was also acknowledged by the spirit cultivation Wei. If he had the form of a spirit refinement before, then now he had the reality of a spirit refinement. From now on, it would not be an exaggeration to call him a spirit refinement almighty being. It was just that just now, he had detached himself from the real world and had yet to truly evolve a real world that was only covered by his own mana. This was just like the beginning of the Yuan show. Everything had a starting point, and only by breaking through this starting point could one see the infinite. As for the other spirit refinement cultivators, they had long since transcended this step. To them, there was no need for them to care about this at all. However, he was different. This real world was extremely important to him. If he was pushed out by the other Wei, then he would fall into eternal silence. So no matter what, he had to find a way to chase them away. Only then would he truly have the right to compete with them. Just now, after coming into contact with them, he sensed that there were only a few Wei here. If it wasn't for the fact that there were only so few spirit refinement cultivators, then there were only a few Wei who invaded this place. Logically speaking, when he reached the upper realm, they shouldn't have known about it. However, for some reason, they still didn't pay attention to this place. After confirming this, he didn't hesitate. He immediately moved his consciousness and prepared to chase away these opponents. However, just as he was about to do so, he felt a sense of danger and his movements paused. He could feel that if he directly pushed out these Wei, it wouldn't be impossible, but it might really alarm those spirit refinement cultivators. Right now, he was still on the weaker side and definitely couldn't compare to these powerful peers, so he couldn't do that. At least, he couldn't go up and fight them directly. He thought about it. Since this path couldn't be taken, then he could only use a roundabout method. The best way was to use these people to fight against each other. When he saw the weak, he would give them a push and chase them out. Since he didn't use much strength, it would be hard for them to notice. When there was only one last bit of strength left, he would kill them in one go. Then, he would be able to occupy this real world by himself. It wasn't easy to do this. Although these whaley were only fighting on their own and the masters behind them didn't take the initiative to control them, they were still moving according to the will of this generation. They wouldn't be easily influenced by external forces, or else they would have been led astray by others. In this case, he could only use a bottom-up method. He looked down and looked at this real world. Although this real-world river was first opened by him, there were now countless forces and cultivators there. All of them had their own origins. Although they didn't have much to do with him, they were all the whaley or even the will of a few spirit refinement cultivators. These forces or cultivators might be their past experiences, or they might be people related to them. However, with the arrival of their respective great powers, they were also reflected within and merged with this world. This was like how after the rivers and streams connected with each other, they would naturally converge together. There was me in you and you in me. If he could walk out of his current predicament, then he could also reflect the original real world. Although he couldn't directly repel the power of these spirit refinement cultivators, he could use certain methods to influence or even influence these people or things, causing them to fight more intensely. Then, through them, he would affect the whaley behind them and finally achieve his goal. First, he had to restrain himself as much as possible and sit as a bystander, watching these people fight. However, because he was there, as long as these living beings were still related to these spirit refinement cultivators, they would naturally know of his existence. It was just that when it came to specific knowledge, there might be some differences. Thinking about this, his mind moved and he had already released a part of his consciousness. It flowed down the real-world river and seeped into the past and the future. Since the beginning of time, yin and yang were separated, the sun and moon were in the same position, the fate of heaven and earth, the strange festival of the 4 seasons. In front of the mountain village, an old man who looked like a beggar was carrying a wine gourd on his back. He was swaying his legs and sitting on a large green rock. He was shaking his head and talking about ancient times. Below him sat a circle of children. But at this moment, all the children waved their hands and shouted, "Don't listen to this, don't listen to this." The old man glared at them. "It's very urgent, let me explain slowly." He gulped down a mouthful of wine and pointed his finger at the sky. He shook it and said, "When heaven and earth were opened, there were billions of worlds. The world above us is called the Great Ancient Heaven. It is below the Kuxing division. Why is this division? You won't understand even if I tell you. As long as you know that everything in the universe is under the rule of the celestial court. Hee, let's test you little monkeys. Who knows about the celestial court?" They all listened with their eyes wide open. Suddenly, a white and fat boy shouted, I know. My dad said that the celestial court is the heavenly Lord." The old man pointed at him and said, "Yes, the celestial court is the heavenly Lord." A child asked curiously, "Is the heavenly Lord the biggest one?" The old man shook his head like a rattle drum and said, "Even the heavenly Lord has to listen to the words of the celestial emperor." "The celestial emperor is the biggest." The old man still shook his head and said, "Although the celestial emperor is big, there are still places that he can't control." He stretched out 3 fingers and said, "There are 3 who are high above the Cheongtian. Their titles are Tai Shang. Even the celestial palace has to worship them." At this moment, a rather big child with a vertical horn said, No, I heard from the headmaster that there are 2 more Tai Shang, a total of 5. As he said this, he even mimicked the old man by opening his palms and gesturing. The old man smiled and said, "You are quite knowledgeable. However, you only know one thing and not the other." The old man is right. There are proper Taoist titles in the celestial court. Although the other 2 are impressive, they don't have titles. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded, "That's not right. The Tai Shang is the ancestor of the Taoist lineage. How dare the celestial court not worship them? It's just that the remaining few are not in the main hall." The old man looked towards the source of the voice and saw a green-robed scholar standing there. He smiled and said, "So you are the little dragon that was demoted." The green-robed scholar was not angry. He smiled and said, "If it wasn't for the fact that the dragon ball that I refined was taken away, would I allow an old beggar with a mortal body like you to make fun of me like this?" The old man smiled and said, "You've seen all my secrets." He waved his tattered sleeves and scattered a handful of colorful 5 light stones. He said, "Go, go." He chased the child below away and limped to the front of the scholar. After looking at him for a moment, he stopped smiling and sighed. "Prince Ing, has it been 600 years since we parted at the celestial gathering?" The green-robed scholar thought for a while and said, "It's exactly 600 years old." The old man looked at him and said, "Prince Ing, where are you going?" The green-robed scholar did not hide it from him and said, "To Mount Landu." The old man thought for a while and said, "To see Immortal Dusher? Is it about your father again?" The green-robed scholar nodded and said yes. The old man sighed and said, "The celestial emperor's subordinates are all gods. Why would he care about chi refinement cultivators? What's more, your father offended Heavenly Mother back then. Immortal Dusher is only the teacher of the 11th prince now. How would he dare to absolve you?" The green-robed scholar insisted and said, "I have to try." The old man shook his head and said, "Based on your father's past relationships, it's better to ask the 4 deputies to come forward and persuade him." The green-robed scholar smiled bitterly and said, "Now that I've been stripped of my celestial record, I can't go up to the Imperial Ingot Hall. How can I meet the 4 deputies? I've sent letters, but there's no reply. Those Star Lords used to call me brothers, but now they're avoiding me like the plague." The old man looked at him and stroked his beard. He revealed a hesitant expression and said in a low voice, "Prince Ing, if you really have the guts, you don't have to look for Immortal Dusher. Why don't you go to Forgotten Continent and beg for his help?" The green-robed scholar was stunned. He knew about Forgotten Continent. That place was separated by 3 mountains and 5 divisions. It was located in the dark and indistinct. Just by walking, it would take over 1,000 years and he might not be able to reach it. Why was the old man advising him to go there? At this moment, his heart stirred and he suddenly thought of something. The old man looked at him and said, "Prince Ing, you must have guessed it. Other than those 5 grand elders, there's another one there. It's just that he doesn't care about the world's matters. Prince Ing can request for an imperial edict from there, and it might solve your father's problem." Chapter 1900. In the celestial leaving continent, Zhang Yan was sitting in a cave dwelling. Ever since his consciousness entered this world, it had landed here. This world was created by him from the very beginning. But what was interesting was that the spirit refinement almighty power that seeped in spontaneously formed worlds and universes. Everything in the room had nothing to do with him. After observing, he believed that these things and living beings should have existed elsewhere, but now that they had intersected with this world, even if this world came to an end, it wouldn't truly perish, because it would continue to exist in the world that the spirit refinement Whaley was involved in. Now, it was merely reflecting in along with the Whaley, thus forming a situation where they intersected with each other. To be precise, this person was currently residing in the world that he had created. As his power was still on the weaker side among the spirit refinement almighty beings, and he was purposely restraining his power, it showed that he was the host instead. He, the creator of the world, had instead become a marginal figure, and the celestial leaving continent had also become a distant celestial mountain. However, all of this would change in the end. What he needed to do was to chase these unwelcome guests out, and then achieve his own perfection. He looked beyond the heavens, and he could feel the unfathomable and profound chi activity there. These were the dharmakayas of a few spirit refinement almighty beings that were reflected here. If the consciousness of the spirit refinement almighty beings went to any of the worlds, they would definitely stand at the highest level of power. At this moment, he felt a few gazes landing on him. He saw these few, and these few could also see him. However, their consciousness that was immersed here was naturally formed, so no matter what happened here, it had nothing to do with the original. Of course, The premise was that these almighty beings didn't notice this beforehand. Compared to these people, although he was temporarily weaker, there was a direct push from the original behind him. Their goal was very clear, and they also knew what they should do. This was his advantage. Now in this world, the order of heaven and earth was controlled by the celestial palace, and the ones who ruled here were a group of gods. What was strange was that this celestial palace actually didn't have any support from the spirit refinement Whaley behind them, and they suddenly appeared before him. However, regarding this, he already had some guesses. There was no need to look into it now, and he could verify it in the future. Other than the celestial palace, there were also several cultivator forces, and they were all directly or indirectly related to the spirit refinement almighty beings. In particular, there was a force that was suspected to be somewhat related to the great underworld patriarch. This generation followed the will of the spirit refinement almighty beings, and they fought and interacted with each other. He was now preparing to make use of this conflict to change the situation and then expel them to achieve this generation's goal. After sitting in the Forgetting Mountain and watching the changes of the world for 1,000,000 years, he already knew the ins and outs of all parties, so he decided not to remain silent any longer. His gaze turned towards the ancient sky and looked at an azure-clothed scholar. This person's name was Jering. His father was the overflowing water dragon king who was in charge of one of the two waters of the Milky Way. 3 years ago, Tian Mother, and dynasty, Tian Mother, Tian Hiton. Although the flow of heavenly water was fixed and couldn't be abused, this dragon king had been in charge for a long time, and he would have some surplus to deal with unexpected situations. Therefore, this was a small matter in the past. However, this time, the 11th prince borrowed a lot of water for a matter, and he had no more water to transfer. If he told the truth, it would only implicate the 11th prince, so he could only use the excuse of messing up the order and refuse to follow the order. After Tian Mother found out about this, she was furious. Then, she found an excuse to throw Dragon King Mi Shui into the Sky Supervisor, and his clan was stripped of their celestial records and banished to the lower realm. This was actually a battle for the throne. The 11th prince was intelligent, and the celestial the Arch doted on him. However, his mother was the daughter of Celestial Emperor Dong Yang, Lord Baojun, and not the Celestial Emperor Kwang Mu, so the Celestial Emperor didn't like him. Not only that, the 11th prince had a Dao root, and it was very likely that he would become the disciple of one of the Grand Elders. The Celestial Emperor Kwang Mu wanted to stop this, so she did this just now. After Zhang Yan saw this, he realized that this internal strife in the heavenly court was an opportunity to break the stalemate. Hence, he made use of the old man's words to lure Jie Ying over to his side. This would be his first move since he entered the world. Outside the White Jade continent, on the meandering river, a canoe floated over. The boatman adjusted his bamboo hat, one hand holding the oar, the other pointing to the front, and said, "Customer, that is the Forgotten Continent." The green-clothed scholar followed the direction of his finger and raised his eyes to look into the distance. He saw the vast river, the white mist was like silk, the sky was vast, the earth was vast, and the clouds were ancient. It was a magnificent picture scroll. At this moment, a long whistle came from the sky, and when he looked up, he saw a huge bird flying over his head, and following the whistle, it flew into the distant sky. He let out a long breath. After thousands of years of trekking, crossing 3 mountains and 5 tribes, he was finally here. The boatman took off the towel on his shoulder and wiped it and said, "Customer, that is the celestial mountain and the celestial realm, we mortals can't go there, so we can only send you here." The green-clothed scholar cupped his hands at him and said, "I am already very grateful to be able to reach this place, thank you, boatman." The boatman waved his hand and said, I don't dare, I wish you all the best." The green-clothed scholar nodded his head heavily. He tidied his clothes and walked out of the small boat. He stepped on the water surface, and it was like he was walking on flat ground. Even though his celestial status was taken away, and he lost his mana, but as the son of a dragon he could still walk on water for a short period of time. As long as he reached the shore in time, he would be fine. The boatman saw him walking on water, and it was not strange. Between heaven and earth, even though celestials and mortals were separated, there were many demons, ghosts, and magical people. He had been here for 30 years, and he had seen them. Seeing that the green-clothed scholar's figure was getting further away, he rowed back. After walking on water for 2 to 3 days, the green-clothed scholar realized something was wrong. The shore didn't look far, but no matter how he walked, he couldn't get close. If this continued, it was possible. But the problem was that he was the son of a dragon, and according to the rules of the celestial heavens, he couldn't go to other water gods' territories without an edict. It wasn't a big crime, and sometimes he could get over it by making friends. But if this matter were to spread to the Heavenly Mother, she would definitely punish him. If not, he wouldn't have asked the boatman to ferry him here, and he would have swum over. Just as he was worrying, a wave suddenly surged on the river, and a white fish leaped out of the water. Its body was supported by the water, and its long whiskers swayed as it spoke. "Is this Crown Prince Ing?" The green-clothed scholar said curiously, "Yes, how do you know me?" The white fish said happily, "It really is Crown Prince Ing. Back then, I received a great favor from the Dragon King of overflowing water, and I couldn't repay it. Later on, I asked an immortal, and he said that after 1,500 years, a son of a dragon will pass by here, and I can repay the favor by then. Today, I've waited for it." The green-clothed scholar was filled with respect, and he cupped his hands. "So it's my father's old friend, how do I address you?" The white fish said, I don't dare. Crown Prince Ing can just call me Mr. Bai. In front of us is the water of the realm, and Crown Prince Ing can't cross it like this. Why don't you get on my back, and I'll give you a lift." The green-clothed scholar suddenly realized that the water of the realm was the border of the heavens, and it separated the two heavens. If he crossed it, he wouldn't be in the vast ancient heavens, and it was no wonder that he couldn't get to the shore. If he were to rely on himself, he might not be able to get out even after walking for thousands of years. He bowed again. "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Bai." He stretched out his leg and got on the back of the white fish. Mr. Bai said, "Crown Prince Ing, stand firm." When the green-clothed scholar said yes, it shook its body, and it split the waves and sped forward. The green-clothed scholar chatted with him during the journey, and he realized that this Mr. Bai was knowledgeable about astronomy and geography. He had lived since the time when the celestial emperor of the current dynasty ascended to the throne, and he could be considered as an elder of the water tribe. It was no wonder that he had some connections with his father, the Dragon King of overflowing water. The white fish traveled for more than 3 months, and it finally reached the shore. Crown Prince Ing came ashore, and he turned around to thank him. The white fish said, "Crown Prince Ing, after passing the plains, we will reach the forgetting celestial mountain. I hope that you will be able to find that Taishang, and pardon the Dragon King of overflowing water." The green-clothed scholar turned around, and he saw that at the end of the plains, there was a majestic celestial mountain that pressed down on the ground, and it was surrounded by clouds and mist, as though it was connected to the sky. He turned around, and saw that the white fish was already gone, and he bowed to the river water, and walked towards the celestial mountain. After a year, he finally reached the foot of the mountain. He raised his head to look at the tall celestial mountain, and he tried to meditate. He realized that there was no response, and his spirit was slightly lifted. This meant that there was no earth or mountain god, and there was no river dragon king here. The billions of worlds and the 10 rulers were all under the rule of the celestial court, but it was only in front of the Taishang, and the celestial court could not control it. This meant that he found the right place. He tidied his clothes, and he bowed to the ground and said loudly, "Dragon King of overflowing water, son of Jie Tanjiao, Jie Ing, kowtows to the Taishang Taoist ancestor." Jie Ing traveled 1,000 mountains and crossed 10,000 rivers, just to seek an imperial edict to solve my father's problem. As he spoke, he kowtowed heavily. His heart was filled with anxiety. He once asked the elder who guided him, and this Taishang had nothing to do with him, so why would he help him? The elder replied, "The Taishang talks about fate, and if I don't try, how would I know?" It was also because of this that he came here with the heart to save his father. After a while, the clouds in front of him slowly dispersed, and a mountain path that led straight to the peak was revealed. When the green-robed scholar saw this, he was extremely emotional and unknowingly his face was filled with tears. He kowtowed 3 times and stood up and followed the mountain path to climb up. This place seemed to be indifferent to everything in the world, and after a long time, he stood in front of a cave dwelling. At this moment, the door opened, and a black-robed youth walked out and said, "Are you junior apprentice Brother Jie?" The green-robed scholar was confused and said, "Yes, I am Jiang. May I ask who you are, elder?" The black-robed youth smiled and said, "I am a sword-bearing servant under the ancestral master, and my name is Dandy Light." Jiang hurriedly bowed and said, "So it is Taoist priest Dandy Light." The black-robed youth walked forward and grabbed his arm and said, "Junior apprentice Brother Jie, follow me." Jiang only felt that his body was involuntarily following him, but the scenery in front of him was flashing, and he felt dizzy. He hurriedly closed his eyes, and after a while, he felt his shoulder being patted, and said, "Junior apprentice Brother Jie, open your eyes, we have reached the boundary." Chapter 1901. Jiang slowly opened his eyes and saw a valley in front of him. Pine trees and cypress trees were green and a stream was flowing. There were dozens of Taoists sitting here. Some were leaning on trees, some were fishing by the stream, some were playing chess in a pavilion, and some were discussing Tao on a rock. They were all leisurely and had the atmosphere of a celestial being. Jiang was affected by the atmosphere and his uneasiness gradually calmed down. He looked around and couldn't help but ask softly, "Where is Grand Supreme?" Dandy Guang smiled and said, "Junior Martial Brother Jie has come from afar and your spirit is weak. Why don't you stay here and recuperate for a few days?" Jiang didn't expect to see Grand Supreme, so he bowed and said, "I will listen to Taoist Dandy Guang's instructions." Dandy Guang waved his hand and said, "No need to be so courteous." He took a step and walked towards a direction. "Junior Martial Brother Jie, follow me." Jiang quickly followed and went around the mountain wall. He walked across a bridge and arrived at a gazebo. He looked out and saw that the small pavilion was built on a stone platform that jutted outwards. 3 sides of the pavilion faced the sea, giving it a wide field of vision. He could see the white clouds in the distant sky and heard the sound of waves slowly approaching. Standing here, he felt his mind and spirit were at ease. Dandy Guang said, "Junior Martial Brother will stay here for a few days." Finishing his words, he didn't mention when he would bring him to see Grand Supreme and left. Jiang regained his senses and looked around. The gazebo was barely big enough to accommodate him and it was hard for him to sleep here. He walked around and his gaze landed on one side of the mountain wall. The stone surface here was polished until it was as smooth as a mirror. He subconsciously touched it and his hands sank into it. He had an idea and tried to walk forward. His whole body slowly walked into it. Once he was inside, he raised his head and exclaimed, "So there's a whole new world here." This was a cave room. The area was not big, but there was an incense burner, a praying mat, a couch, a table, and even a study room. Furthermore, there was a clear pond at the side, and there was a hole right above it. A strand of golden light just happened to pass through the top, and a small curtain of waterfall rushed down from the gap at the top. Water mist splashed everywhere, reflecting a gorgeous light. He took a few steps forward, scooped up a handful of water, and drank a mouthful. It was clear and sweet, and he exclaimed, "Good." Then he fetched a bucket from the side, drew some water, and washed himself a little. By the time Zhang Xian was done, his mind had cleared up. He saw a row of books on the bookshelf, and out of curiosity, he walked up and took one of them. When he opened it, he saw that it was the first Taoist book. On it were the 4 words, "Essence of Tao Enlightenment." Since he had nothing to do, he continued to read. He discovered that this Taoist book was concise and to the point, and it completely explained the principles. It could be said that every word was a gem. After reading this book, even a stupid person would know how to enter the Tao. In the past, when he was free, he had privately read many Taoist books, but none of them could compare to this book. However, because the book was too well written, he only flipped through it for a while before closing it, not daring to look again. He was afraid that if he continued to read, he would not be able to stop himself from walking on the path of cultivation. If that happened, he would not be able to retrieve the celestial records, and he would not be able to save his father. Currently, the heavenly court and the cultivators seemed to be in harmony on the surface, but in reality, it was not as such. There were actually all kinds of contradictions hidden in the dark. Those who had a position or were appointed as heavenly officers and celestial officials were not allowed to cultivate. Not to mention this, the heavenly court currently worshipped the branch of virtue and Tao, and also worshipped the 3 Taishang of this branch in the main hall. As for the remaining few, they were only in the side halls, and they were only worshipped but not worshipped. Their Tao teachings were not even known by the world, and from this, one could see the attitude of the heavenly court. He put the book in his hand back, and secretly reminded himself that if he wanted to save his father, he must not touch these things again. However, when he sat down, he realized that those words were still lingering in his mind. It turned out that he had the celestial records, and these things he had only read with a laugh, but now they had a great attraction to him. In his annoyance, he could only lie down and sleep. However, he tossed and turned the whole night, and when he woke up the next day, he was in low spirits and could only go out to relax. After a few days, he became more familiar with the people here, but he was not summoned by the Taishang. He was secretly anxious, but he did not dare to ask too much, and could only persuade himself to wait patiently. Half a month later, Dongguang finally appeared, and said, "Junior brother Jie, today the patriarch will be preaching Tao, follow me." When Jie Ying heard this, he hurriedly followed, and they followed the chain bridge back into the valley. They walked up a cloud ladder, and after some time, they arrived at the peak of the mountain. There was a huge palace, and in front of the palace, there was a young Taoist sitting on a jade platform. Below him, there were hundreds of Taoists sitting, and there were even some spiritual birds and auspicious beasts perched on the treetops, or crouching far away. At this moment, all of them looked like they were listening respectfully. Dongguang arranged a place for them to sit, and then went to the front to sit. Not long after, he heard the sound of a bell, and the sound of the vast Tao reverberated in his ears. However, he was only the son of a dragon, and even though he practiced qi when he was young, he had long given up on it after becoming an immortal. Therefore, he could only vaguely hear it, and did not really understand it. However, he did not care about it, and was instead glad that he did not understand it. After some time, he felt someone pushing him. "Junior brother Jie, wake up." Jie Ying suddenly woke up, and realized that he had fallen asleep just now, and felt ashamed. He stood up and said, "Taoist Dongguang, I have been rude." Dongguang smiled. "No matter, the patriarch wants to see you." Jie Ying's spirit was lifted, and he looked around. Just now, more than half of the people listening to the preaching had left, and only a few people were still there, deep in thought, as if they were trying to understand something. He followed Dongguang to the stage, and did not dare to raise his head. Not long after, Dongguang's voice sounded, "Patriarch, Jie Ying is here." Then a clear voice said, "Call him up." At this moment, Jie Ying was extremely nervous. Even though he was the son of a dragon, he had never had the honor of meeting the Taishang Taoist ancestor. Therefore, he walked up to the jade stage and bowed. "Dragon son Jiang greets the Taishang." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and said in a gentle voice, "Stand up and speak." Jie Ying expressed his thanks, got up and stood respectfully on the spot. Zhang Yan took a few glances at him and said with a smile, "I already know why you are here. Since you are able to come to my place, it must be fate. Let me ask you, are you willing to cultivate under my tutelage? In this way, I can write an imperial edict, and your father will be absolved of his crimes." Jie Ying was instantly excited, and he wanted to speak, but Dongguang said, "Junior martial brother Jie, once the imperial edict arrives, you will be absolved of any crimes you have committed in the past. However, if you become a disciple of the Taishang Taoist ancestor, then from today onwards, all descendants of your clan will not be able to become officials in the heavenly court. This is also the agreement between the heavenly court and the Taishang, and you have to understand the crux of it." Jie Ying was stunned. He really didn't know that there was such a rule here, and he was instantly in a dilemma. Even if it wasn't to save his father, He was very willing to become a disciple of the Taishang Taoist ancestor. However, under the bloodline of the Dragon King of Overflowing Water, there were more than 10 million dragon species, and they were in charge of all the rivers in the world. Once he agreed, it would mean that these dragon species would be removed from the immortal records, and would no longer have anything to do with the immortal court. The price was secondary, but he really couldn't make this decision alone. Zhang Yan saw that he was hesitating and smiled. "Go back and think about it carefully." Seeing that he didn't have to make a decision immediately, Jie Ying heaved a sigh of relief, and he bowed. "Thank you, Taishang." Dongguang sent him down from the stage and advised him, "Junior martial brother Jie, once you enter the Dao sect, you will no longer be restricted by the laws of heaven, and you will be free and unfettered." What's wrong with that? It's rare for ancestral master to think highly of someone, so don't miss this opportunity. Go back and think about it carefully. Jie Ying was a yes man, and after bidding farewell to Dongguang, he returned to the cave dwelling. However, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't make up his mind. On one side was his father, and on the other side was his clan. He didn't know how to choose, and it was torturous. He couldn't help but feel angry, and he secretly cursed why there were so many rules in this world. He really couldn't make up his mind, so he took a pen and paper and decided to ask his mother in the book about how he should make this decision. On the other side, Dongguang returned to the stage and said, "Ancestral Master, I'm afraid junior martial brother Jie won't be able to make a decision in a short period of time." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's fine, he is with me now, and the chess piece has already been placed. It's entirely up to me when to move." At this moment he suddenly paused and he looked towards a certain direction and smiled. "Dongguang, go down the mountain and do something." Dongguang bowed and said, "Please instruct me, ancestral master." Zhang Yan gently waved his sleeve, and a pond appeared in front of him and said, "Look at this." Dongguang knew that this was the world reflection pond, and everything in the world, other than the Taishang's side and the heavenly court's secret, could be seen here. He looked over and he saw a past. Back then, Heavenly Capital West Country Mi Luo's Saint Heavenly King's birthday. To add a congratulatory gift, Heavenly Mother ordered child Jean Ling to water a pleasant heart grass, and it was prepared to be used as incense on the birthday. The pleasant heart grass knew what would happen to it, so it turned into a young girl and cried and begged day and night. Child Jean Ling couldn't bear to see it, and he let it go down to the lower bound. After the matter was exposed, Heavenly Mother demoted child Jean Ling to Yu Li, and she tied him to the heaven candle with a pure gold chain, piercing his collarbone and piercing his intestines. Not only did he have to use this item to light up the celestial palace, but he also had to endure the pain of being burned by the yang fire. The pleasant heart grass went to the mortal world to reincarnate, and it was given the body of a girl, and her name was Xiaoling. She was born to be extremely beautiful, and when she was 16, she went to Xixia Fairy Temple to pray. Coincidentally, this fairy was passing by, and seeing that she had some spiritual qi, she took her in as a maid. One day, Xixia Fairy went to the Imperial Emperor's birthday banquet, and she also brought Xiaoling with her. However, she was fancied by the three princes present, and Xixia Fairy wanted to help them, so she took her in as a fake daughter, and sent her to the palace of the three princes to become a prince's concubine. At this point, the scenery gradually became blurry, and Fan Tianguang knew that something must have happened. However, it hadn't happened yet, so he said, "Patriarch, is there something wrong with this girl?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This girl came down to the lower bound because she was plotted by a grand master. Even though she acted according to the decree, her mind was a little narrow-minded, and what she did wasn't on the right path. I think she must have made a mistake this time, so find a chance to send this golden mirror to the third prince's Xiaolong palace. After that, you don't have to worry about her anymore." Fan Tianguang obeyed, bowed, and left in a rainbow light. Chapter 1902. After Zhang Yan ordered Dongguang to leave, he looked towards the direction of the celestial heavens. The fight between the few Taishang wasn't a direct clash, but it was limited to the fight for the position of the orthodox sect. What was the position of orthodox sect? It was the Tao vein that was respected by the celestial heavens. Putting aside the fact that the celestial heavens could be on equal footing with the Taishang, the fact that the position of the Venerable could cause the Taishang to fight for it was worth investigating. He pondered deeply. These few Taishang shouldn't be fighting for the celestial heavens itself. Otherwise, no matter how powerful the celestial heavens was, it would have been long gone. There should be something behind it. It was possible that any of the Taishang could use it to expel the rest of the spirit refinement Whaley. Or perhaps the Taishang had an agreement among themselves that after one of them held the position for a long time, the rest would have to leave. There seemed to be a layer of fog shrouding this place. Even he couldn't deduce the real reason, and the past and future were even more blurry. But because of this, it proved that his guess was not wrong. At this moment, he turned his gaze and saw that a few spiritual birds and auspicious beasts were still lingering there. An idea came to his mind, and after some calculation, he called a boy over and said, "I remember that in the candlelight room at the back, there are 5 nightless lanterns sent from Yu country?" The boy replied, "Yes, they are given by Heavenly King Yu Guochang to the Patriarch." Zhang Yan said, "I see that those birds and beasts have nothing to do. Pass down my order them to guard the candle room." The boy acknowledged and went to make the arrangements. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves, got up the carriage, and returned to the Dao Palace. When the Taoists below saw the Patriarch leaving, they all stood up and bowed to send him off. Danguang left the Li Wang Celestial Mountain and went straight to the Imperial Yuan Hall of the Celestial Heavens. However, when he arrived at the boundary, he frowned. He saw a divine general in golden armor and holding a whip standing under the watchtower. His eyes were bright, and he actually gave off an awe-inspiring aura. He did not expect that dazzling She-Star Lord would be on duty today. Her pair of wise eyes could see through the heavens above and search the abyss below. Ordinary concealment techniques were useless in front of her. After pondering for a moment, he took out a green leaf from his bosom and muttered, "Let's hope this thing is useful." With a toss, the leaf floated above his head. Then he stepped into the Forbidden Palace. The strange thing was that he did not use any techniques to hide himself, but the 100-odd immortal generals, including Star Lord Dazzling Shi, ignored his arrival. Their gazes did not even linger on him for a moment. He didn't waste any more time and went straight to the front of the palace. Raising his head, he saw a horizontal board hanging in front of the palace's forbidden entrance. On it, there were 2 words written by the Celestial Emperor, Wan Long. At this moment, it was glowing brightly, cleansing the filthy evil. He knew that if he were to get any closer, he would most likely be exposed. However, there was no need for him to get any closer. He tossed the golden mirror down, and in a flash of spiritual light, he entered the palace. After doing this, he didn't stay for a moment. He immediately left and returned to Mount Li Wang. However, halfway there, he heard chirping sounds. He looked down and saw a large group of people with bird faces and human bodies heading east. He didn't want to be meddlesome, but when he heard these people talking about Xixia Fairy, he couldn't help but think about what happened before. So, he stopped one of them and asked, "Just now, I heard that you were talking about Xixia Fairy. Seeing that you are in a hurry, where are you going?" The bird-headed man said, "Immortal, we are all from the Cicada Mountain tribe under Fairy Xixia. We heard that Fairy Xixia's younger brother, Bio Celestial Official, has offended a great deity and is currently being imprisoned in a lake. Fairy Xixia has summoned us from the 7 tribes to save him." After Dongguang heard it, he was deep in thought. However, after thinking about it again, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. This time, he came and went without a trace. Now that he stopped to ask questions, he exposed his tracks and fell into the hands of people with ill intentions. In the future, he might be implicated. However, just now, his soul was covered in dust and he didn't think about this. It was very likely that he had fallen into someone's trap. He felt that something was wrong, so he hurried back to Mount Li Wang. After reporting to the outside, he entered the main hall and came before Zhang Yan. He bowed and said, "Ancestral Master, the golden mirror has been placed in Zhuanlong Palace. However, on the way back, I accidentally exposed my tracks. Please punish me, Ancestral Master." Zhang Yan smiled, "It's fine. It's not your fault that you exposed your tracks. However, this is already within my expectations. I will deal with it in the future. As he spoke, he looked outside. There is a guest. Dongguang, you can leave first. Dongguang bowed and left the main hall respectfully. Zhang Yan stood up. Not long after, a Taoist in his 30s with a long beard walked in slowly. The person bowed to him and said, "Taoist friend, you are too polite." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "Taoist friend, you came from afar. Why don't you take a seat and talk?" The Taoist thanked him and sat down on the guest seat. He said, "I didn't do things in secret." Fortunately, Taoist friend helped to remedy the situation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "As long as Taoist friend doesn't blame me for meddling." The main purpose of his action this time was to convey his attitude to the two grand elders who served in the side hall. It was obvious that they understood his goodwill and came to visit. This was in line with his plan. However, under normal circumstances, the two of them wouldn't reject this. It was because compared to the Tao of virtue, they weren't in a proper position, belonging to the side that was being suppressed. Meanwhile, being suppressed in itself meant that they were comparatively weaker. Now that there was someone of the same generation that was willing to join, they wouldn't reject him no matter what. The Taoist said, "I wouldn't dare." As he said that, he looked over and said, "What Taoist friend is looking for?" Zhang Yan knew that the Taoist was asking him if he wanted to give them some face or if he wanted to join hands with them to fight against the enemy. He smiled and said, "Tao of virtue is not what I want." Once this was said, the Taoist also understood what he meant. He nodded and said, "Today, the heavenly court regards the Tao of virtue as the main position. Our positions are only in the side hall. We are not respected. This is not what I want. Today, we should pursue the Tao of virtue and promote our Tao." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That is how it should be." The Taoist said again, "Another Taoist friend and I will establish the same Tao line and take the word, complete. Does Taoist friend have any suggestions?" Zhang Yan said, "I will follow the two Taoist friends' suggestions." Naming seemed like a small matter, but in reality, it involved the problem of who was the master and who was the subordinate. However, to him, these two were also outsiders. After he pushed down Tao of virtue, they would also find a way to get rid of them. Therefore, it really didn't matter what name they were going to be called. The Taoist saw that he didn't object and his expression became more relaxed. It was obvious that he had recognized their alliance. He said, "The heavens change. In order to take care of the heavenly secrets, the emperor's position will change. Today, the heavenly emperor's position is about to change. Taoist friend, which prince do you think has the appearance of a divine master?" Zhang Yan had long since understood that regardless of whether it was these two or the three celestial emperors of virtue and Tao, they all placed great importance on this emperor. This was because after today, the next celestial emperor would undoubtedly only worship the person who supported him. He thought for a while and said, "I think that the 11th prince's heart is veiled with the great Tao and can be the ruler." The Taoist said, "Taoist friend, don't you know that the 11th prince wanted to worship Tao of virtue and Tao of virtue as his master, but he was rejected." Now, in the celestial court, everyone thinks that he is frivolous and doesn't have the appearance of a heavenly master. Some star lords advise to banish him from the celestial court. Now, he can't even protect himself, let alone fight for the throne. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "It might not be a bad thing to take a step back." He could naturally see that the two Taoists of virtue and Tao of virtue were supporting another prince on the surface, but in reality, the 11th prince was the one they really valued. This time, it was just their plan. Now, the celestial court could be considered a pool of muddy water. Instead of getting involved in this battle, it would be better to retreat first. At least, he could protect himself first. Of course, the three Taoists of virtue and Tao of virtue would also make a move in the main hall. They came out today so that they could return in the future. If they couldn't return, then everything would be over. The Taoist said, "Since Taoist friend thinks so highly of him, then please take care of this prince." Zhang Yan thought about it and immediately understood what the Taoist was trying to do. He wanted to see that Zhang Yan had fallen into the trap and was preparing to get out of it. The original dark one might become the bright one, and the bright one might become the dark one. He might face the pressure of the Tao of virtue alone. He sneered in his heart. This was a good plan. The two of them didn't want to lose out at all and instead wanted to make use of him. However, he had already expected this. As for what the outcome would be, it would depend on each person's plan. Thus he said, "That's good too. With me taking care of this place, the two of you can rest assured." The Taoist bowed and said, "With Taoist friends' help, I have nothing to worry about." The two of them chatted for a while more before the Taoist left. However, although this person had never interacted with him before, from start to finish, he didn't ask about his background. Actually, there was no need to ask, because they all knew that they were only formed by a strand of consciousness. If the original didn't notice them, then they wouldn't be able to communicate with the original. It was the same whether they knew or not. Moreover, their goal was to chase away the rest of the spirit refinement Weili. They didn't care about the rest. Zhang Yan didn't ask him why he wanted to fight for the position of the spirit refinement Weili. Because from the Taoist point of view, it was obvious that he should know about it. This further confirmed his previous judgment. Although it wasn't clear now, in the end, he would definitely know the result. It was just that the 11 kings would be exiled very soon. Since the two of them had stopped, then they needed to ensure their safety. He thought deeply for a while and summoned a few Taoists with swords. After giving them some instructions, he ordered them to go down the mountain to make arrangements. In the blink of an eye, a few months had passed. Jiang had stayed in Mount Li Wang for almost half a year. A few days ago, he received a reply from his mother. His mother said that he would be the one to make the decision. No matter what decision he made, she wouldn't blame him. After thinking deeply for a few days, he finally made a decision. He tidied up his clothes and stood up solemnly. He pushed open the door and not long after, he found the place where Wan Guang was cultivating. When he saw Wan Guang, he bowed deeply and said, "Taoist Wan Guang, I have thought it through. How can I not take what heaven has given me? I am willing to become a disciple of the Taoist sect." Chapter 1903. With that, Jie Ying knelt down and kowtowed. Zhang Yan said warmly, "I have 9 disciples and there are many dragons under my 6th disciple. If you become his disciple, it will be much easier for you to do things. Are you willing?" He had stopped accepting disciples a long time ago. After entering the modern realm, other than Dongguang and the rest who were considered 3rd-generation disciples, the rest were only considered disciples. Jie Ying quickly said, "I am willing." He didn't dare to hope to become the Grand Supreme's direct disciple. It was already a great opportunity for him to enter the sect. Zhang Yan shook his sleeves and a golden decree floated down from the sky. He said, "Dongguang, go to the heavens again and send this decree to the heaven hall. Let Dragon King Mi Shui be absolved of his crimes." Dongguang took it and said solemnly, "Yes, Grand Supreme." Jie Ying kowtowed and said gratefully, "Thank you, Grand Supreme. Thank you, Grand Supreme." Dongguang smiled, "Junior brother Jie, since you have entered the sect, you should call me Ancestral Master." Jie Ying nodded again and said, "Yes, greetings, Ancestral Master." When he said that, he felt his body shake and he felt a sense of loss. Then, he felt a sense of relief as if he had gotten rid of something. This was because even though his celestial record was removed, he was still under the jurisdiction of the heavens. Moreover, if there was a need, a Jade Decree could be used to bring him back. Now that he was a disciple of the Grand Supreme, these things couldn't restrict him anymore. However, at this moment he was also worried about his people. All of them were the heaven's water gods and because of him, they were about to be removed from their celestial records. There were more than 1 billion people who would be affected by this. However, he didn't know if what he did was right or wrong. But since he had made the decision, he didn't regret it. Moreover, his identity as a disciple of the Grand Supreme was enough to protect his people. Zhang Yan said, "Since you have entered my sect, you should learn Tao techniques." He called out and another Taoist came up. He was about 20 years old and had a gentle expression. He was plump and had a smile on his moon-like face. Zhang Yan said, "Yi Guang, you will guide Jie Ying in his cultivation." Yi Guang bowed and said, "Don't worry, ancestral master. Leave junior martial brother Jie to me." He looked down and said in a friendly tone, "Junior martial brother Jie, follow me." Jie Ying acknowledged and stood up to bow to Zhang Yan before following Yi Guang out of the hall. Outside, Yi Guang smiled and asked, "Junior brother Jie, what do you want to learn?" Jie Ying hesitated for a while and said, "Senior martial brother should know that I used to be an official in the Heaven Court and I don't know much about Dao techniques. May I know what techniques senior martial brother has?" Yi Guang said, "There are countless Dao techniques under the founding master's tutelage. But to put it simply, there are only two. One is the art of immortality, and the other is the secret techniques. Junior apprentice brother, which one do you plan to learn?" Jie Ying hesitated for a moment before asking, "Can't I learn all of them?" When there was an immortal record, the heavenly courts would conduct an examination every 100 years. If they passed, they would naturally increase their lifespan. Even if their lifespan ended, they could reconstruct a body for them. From then on, they would no longer have to worry about their lives. But once the immortal record was removed, there would be no such benefit. This was also the reason why Dao techniques did not flourish in the world. You worked so hard to cultivate, but it was not even comparable to a heavenly court's edict. Even if you violated the law of heaven and were removed from the immortal record, there was no guarantee that you would succeed in cultivating Dao techniques. Instead, only a few people could enter the gate of immortality. Dragons had a long lifespan. Even a dragon who did not cultivate could live up to 10,000 years. Jing was only 3,000 years old and it was not the time for him to worry about such things. However, there was no sense of time in cultivation. In the blink of an eye, the world would change. Since he had entered this sect, he naturally wanted to enjoy the scenery of this world. But the art of Dao protection was equally important. Otherwise, even if he could achieve immortality, he would instantly turn into dust when the calamity came. Yi Guang laughed and said, "Of course you can. Junior martial brother is a dragon and born with a long lifespan. Ordinary people can be exempted from following the prescribed method. However, the art of entry is to build a strong foundation. It is especially important that you deal with it carefully. Junior martial brother, have you read the essentials of Dao techniques?" Jie Ying replied honestly, "There is such a book in the cave. I have already read it." Yi Guang said, "Now that you have saved yourself some trouble, I will recite a few incantations. Remember them by heart and do not spread them out. Otherwise, you will only harm yourself and others." Jie Ying saw that his expression became serious towards the end. His heart tightened. He used to be the heavenly court's water god and he valued the rules the most. He put his hands together and replied solemnly, "Senior martial brother, I understand." Yi Guang looked at him for a while and suddenly smiled. He waved his hand and said, "We are brothers, there is no need to be so formal." He paused and his lips moved as he recited the incantations. Jie Ying listened attentively and memorized them. Yi Guang said, "Junior martial brother, remember these incantations. Go back and cultivate diligently. If there is anything you do not understand, come and ask me. After you have built your Dao foundation, I will teach you the secret techniques." Jie Ying replied respectfully. Yi Guang gave him a few more words of encouragement and left. Jie Ying returned to the cave and cultivated diligently. Perhaps it was because of his strong foundation, he was accepted into the sect within 2 to 3 days. He then went to ask Yi Guang for advice. This time, he was taught many Dao techniques. However, the cultivation of these techniques was much harder than Dao techniques. He spent more than a month and just now, he had only mastered one of them. He sighed in his heart. It was only because he was a dragon that he could cultivate like this. If he was an ordinary person, he could only first stabilize his Dao technique, and when he had an extra lifespan, he could then seek for the secret technique. If he blindly pursued this, even if he cultivated some extraordinary technique, he would probably be old and decrepit by then. For the next few days, he would ask Yi Guang for advice every 2 to 3 days. Not only did Yi Guang not find it troublesome, he was also satisfied with his attitude. He praised, "Junior martial brother, you are diligent in your cultivation. It is rare." Jiang was ashamed. He was not so diligent in his cultivation for his own sake. He had to think about his clansmen who were implicated by him. Therefore, he decided that after he was successful in his cultivation, he would try to get his clansmen to join the sect. After he was done, he was about to leave when Yi Guang stopped him. He said, "I have to tell Junior Marshal Brother that Senior Marshal Brother Wan Guang is back today." Jiang was shocked and became excited. He said, Could it be?" Yi Guang said, "Your father has returned to the underwater residence. Once you are successful in your cultivation, you can go back and visit him." After the imperial edict was delivered, Dragon King Mi Shui was released. However, Mi Shui had nothing to do with his dragon bloodline anymore. The gains and losses here could not be explained in a short time. Jie Ying felt his whole body go limp as if he was about to collapse. He had been working hard for this matter for thousands of years. Finally, there was a result. He cupped his hands and said sincerely, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother, for telling me." Yi Guang patted his shoulder. After all, they were family. He said, "You don't have to be so courteous." After Jie Ying was relieved of this burden, he worked even harder. He cultivated in the Li Wang mountain for hundreds of years. One day, Yi Guang called him over. After a series of tests, he smiled and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, based on your original foundation and current techniques, you can be considered as a celestial." In the Heaven Court, cultivators who were successful in their cultivation were usually divided into 4 groups. They were scattered immortals, earth immortals, heaven immortals, and true immortals. Scattered immortals roamed the world without a fixed residence. In reality, they were cultivators who had no foundation but had some cultivation. Earth immortals founded their own sects and were famous in the sea. These people were the chi practitioners who occupied various spiritual mountains and residences in the world. Heaven immortals were worshipped by incense. These were the people who were taught Tao talismans in the Heaven Court. They had their own duties. Now, most of them were cultivators who believed in the Tao of virtue. And true immortals were the people of the Taishang sect. These 4 groups were not divided into ranks. They only showed their different origins. However, normally, heaven immortals and true immortals were either related to the Heaven Court or the Taishang sect. Therefore, if their cultivation was not mentioned, their status was higher than the other 2. Jie Yingyuan was a water god himself, so he naturally knew about this. He said, "Really? Senior Marshal Brother, are you kidding me?" Yi Guang smiled and said, "You are a dragon. As long as you know some Tao techniques, you will be better than normal cultivators. Moreover, what you cultivate is a superior Tao. It is not something the unorthodox path can compare to. It is normal for you to have such achievements." He took a talisman pouch from the table and passed it over. He said, "Junior Marshal Brother, you have cultivated for a long time. You have learned many Tao techniques and secret techniques. It is time for you to go down the mountain. Take this and open it when you reach the foot of the mountain. There will be instructions inside." When Jie Ying heard this, he guessed that this was another test. He took it and immediately went to Wan Guang's place to bid farewell. Then he packed up and went down the mountain. In the cave abode at the peak of the mountain, Zhang Yan was looking in the direction of the Heaven Court. Over the past 100 years, the fight for the throne had become more and more intense. The fight in the dark had gradually surfaced. However, the Heaven Emperor did not care about it. No one knew what he was planning. However, at this time, he received a piece of news. The left imperial censors stole the heavenly talisman? The left and right imperial censors were the trusted aides of the Heaven Emperor. They usually took care of the Heaven Emperor's palace, communicated with the inside and outside, and were in charge of documents. Among them, the left imperial censor had a higher status. For such a person to steal the heavenly talisman, there must be a reason behind it. The heavenly talisman was a celestial treasure. The Heaven Emperor invited the 2 Taishang sects of virtue and Tao to work together. Just now, they were able to create this item. Normally, it could be used to command celestial soldiers. Even if mortals obtained it, they could use it to control ghosts and gods. However, as long as the Heaven Emperor was still around, there would be no chaos below. However, this was not the most troublesome part. Some of the celestial books had their own limits. Once used, they would disappear from the world. There were also some that were related to the karma of the future. If used improperly, even the billions of worlds would change. Thus, even the Heaven Emperor did not dare to misuse them. If this item was not found in time, the longer it was left outside, the greater the consequences would be. Zhang Yan made some calculations and found that this was concealed by the heavenly secrets. He smiled faintly and did not try to understand the reason. He could also see that this was the work of the Tao of Virtue. They were trying to force the Heaven Emperor to make a stand. If the opponent wanted to do it, he naturally had to think of a way to oppose it. He immediately called Dongguang over and gave him some instructions. Then, he ordered him to bring a treasure down the mountain. He knew that after the two of them saw this, they would definitely make a move. However, although he and the two of them could be considered to be allies, it seemed that they only needed him to protect the 11th prince. As for other matters, they never discussed with him. Thus, there were no rumors of this coming. However, he had already expected this. Since the other party did not say anything, he was happy to pretend that he did not know. As for what would happen next, it would depend on their own methods. Chapter 1904. The night was as dark as ink. A middle-aged man wearing a xiezhi crown and a dark robe was sitting in a ruined temple on a small hill. He had a high nose and a high forehead. He had a beautiful beard on his chin. His lips were tightly pursed, and his eyebrows were like swords that slanted to his temples. One look and one could tell that he was a man of upright temperament. The left imperial censor of the Heaven Court, Ying Kuang. His eyes were tightly shut at this moment, and he looked as if he had fallen asleep. Silently, a mass of black fog spread out from the temple, gradually approaching him, and very quickly reached in front of him, but looking at it, he still did not notice it. Dozens of sharp claws stretched out from the fog. Under the weak candlelight, the claws were reflected on the wall, and then they slowly clawed at him. However, at this moment, Ying Kuang suddenly opened his eyes, and a sharp light shot out. He said coldly, "Demons and monsters, how dare you spy on the divine item?" Boom! In the ruined temple at the top of the mountain, a white light was suddenly released, and the whole mountain top was illuminated as if it was daytime. Ying Kuang stood up and looked down, and he saw traces of charred marks had appeared on the ground of the temple, and they drew out the appearance of numerous savage and strange ghosts. He frowned and said, "Demonic ghosts? The Emperor of the Mansion of Hell? How did the news spread so fast?" He pondered for a moment and walked out of the temple. At this moment, the thick fog that originally shrouded the sky wall was dissipating, and a crescent moon was barely revealed. Within it, the figure of a delicate woman could be vaguely seen. He looked up and sneered, "Even deity she covets the heavenly talisman?" After a while, a gentle voice was heard, "Left Imperial Censor, I haven't forgotten your kindness in the past. I just want to tell Left Imperial Censor that 500 patrolling divine generals, led by the 18 celestial lords, have descended to the lower realm to capture you. You must be careful." As the voice faded away, the faint moon was soon covered by the dark fog again. Ying Kuang sneered, 18 celestial lords? In the past, the priests who rebelled against the Heaven Court might have been afraid of them, but they weren't afraid at all. After stealing the heavenly talisman and descending to the lower realm, he was stripped of his immortal record. In his eyes, he no longer had any divine abilities or magic power. But in reality, no one knew that in his early years, he had obtained a strange treasure that could imbue the magic power of a cultivator into it. Although he looked ordinary, he had secretly cultivated a body full of magic power. Although it couldn't be said that he was omnipotent, he could go anywhere in the world. Moreover, with the heavenly talisman in hand, he dared to fight even 3,000 patrolling divine generals. There was another reason. This was not just his own matter. He was able to successfully steal the heavenly talisman, rebel against the heavenly courts, and successfully descend to the lower realms. There were actually people from the supreme sect helping him in secret. Before the Celestial the Arch chose a prince who was suitable for the three exalted ones, he would definitely be fine, and the three exalted ones wouldn't let anything happen to him. Of course, the premise was that the heavenly talisman was still in his hands. There were many people who wanted the heavenly talisman. Just now, the demonic ghost was obviously a subordinate of the emperor of the underworld. He believed that as the news spread, there would be more such troubles. He looked at the sky. He knew the celestial censor very well and knew that he wouldn't compromise so easily. Therefore, he still had a long time to complete his plan. He took out a magic art and used an escape technique to escape through the underground and the river. He didn't dare to fly into the sky because there were celestial lords on duty. If he showed himself, he would be discovered. Although there were gods of earth and mountains and rivers on the continent, their cultivation was relatively low and they might not be able to distinguish his identity. There were millions of worlds and millions of stars in the world. However, under the rule of the celestial censor, there weren't many places that could avoid the celestial censor's pursuit. However, without the permission of the celestial censor, one wouldn't be able to reach the door. Other than that, there was actually another place, and that was the Great Kuan Divine Tree. The roots of this giant tree were connected to the universe, forming a world of its own. It was known as the world stabilizing pillar. It was said that after the primal chaos split apart, this tree had already existed. It was even half a disciple of a supreme elder, which was why the heavenly court didn't bother to restrain it. As the left imperial censor, Yin Kuang had read through many secret books of the celestial censor. He knew that the divine tree had another ability besides being able to connect to the universe. That was the purpose of his trip. After a few months, he arrived at the foot of the elder wood. He saw a thick trunk that connected the heavens and the earth standing in front of him, and this was only one of the tens of millions of the divine tree's roots. The divine tree had its own consciousness. When it sensed his arrival, a loud voice sounded, "Left Imperial Censor Yin Kuang. What are you doing here? I can't protect you." Yin Kuang said, "I'm not here to beg you to protect me. I just want to take a piece of the divine tree." "How dare you?" The Kuan would seem to be extremely angry about this. With a roar, heaven and earth shook. Yin Kuang's expression didn't change at all. He reached into his sleeve and took out an item. He held it in his palm. A spot of light shone like a stream of light. It was barely visible that it was a talisman. Heavenly talisman? The voice revealed a hint of fear. Yin Kuang said calmly, "If you don't want it, I'll take it myself." The divine tree instantly fell silent. After a long time, a broken branch fell from the sky. Yin Kuang caught it and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you." The voice seemed to be disgusted with him. Leave quickly." Yin Kuang achieved his goal and didn't want to stay here any longer. He used his fingers like a knife and cut the branch into a talisman. He then put it in his sleeve and left. With this item, he could use a secret technique to refine it when he was free to hide himself. Then, even if the Grand Supreme didn't protect him anymore, he wouldn't have to worry about the Heaven Court. He could go to billions of universes. Just now, when he arrived at the border of the Border River, he saw an amiable-looking elder wearing a Taoist crown standing there. The elder smiled at him and said, "I knew that Left Imperial Censor would come here." Yin Kuang said, "Who are you?" The elder cupped his hands at him and said, "5 Liang Mountains Yushuan Cave, Qi Practitioner Zhao Yao. Greetings." Yin Kuang said coldly, "You're here for the heavenly talisman?" He snorted, "You're just an itinerant celestial. How dare you covet this item?" Zhao Yao smiled and said, "You are mistaken, Minister Zhua. This time, I was entrusted by someone to pass on a message. If Minister Zhua has nowhere to go, you can come to my Dao. In the universe, no one will be able to take you down." Quan Dao lineage? The Quan Dao lineage had only been established for a mere 100 years. It wasn't famous now, but as the Left Imperial Censor, Celestial Emperor's close subject, Yin Kuang had heard of it before. He knew that it involved 2 Grand Supreme who served in the side hall. He looked at him but didn't reply. He stepped into the border water and in an instant he was already on the other side. Zhao Yao looked at him leaving and said loudly, "Left Imperial Censor, you know that the heavenly talisman isn't that easy to get. When the battle for the throne is decided, you'll become an abandoned chess piece. If you have nowhere to go, You can come to my 5 Liang mountain. I'll be waiting for you there. Ying Kuang didn't even turn his head and left. Another half a month later, he came to Tongdu Day. This was the land of the Zhou dynasty in the lower bound. He found a secluded place outside the city and settled down. He started to refine the elder wood at the mouth of a spirit spring that was hidden there. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. 2 Taoists walked in from outside. They barged into the inner court, and when they found him, one of them scolded, "Ying Kuang, why didn't you follow senior brother's words and go to Tianwu Mountain? Why did you stay in the mortal realm?" The other Taoist added, "Left Imperial Censor, don't you know that it's easy to expose your whereabouts? If you're found by the Celestial Court, we can't help you because of the rules." Ying Kuang replied coldly, "How I, Ying Kuang, do things is none of your business. How dare you?" The leading Taoist shouted angrily, "Could it be that you came back to the lower bound to steal the talisman because of your own ability? If it wasn't for the protection of the Grandmaster's arcane energy, you wouldn't be here." Ying Kuang's face was filled with annoyance. A white light flashed on his body, and before the 2 Taoists could react, they disappeared from the spot as if they had never been there. Ying Kuang took out the talisman from his sleeve and saw a celestial book on it slowly fading away until it almost disappeared. He thought, as expected of a disciple of the Supreme Sect, just by using it a little, there's one less celestial book. Just as he was thinking, a voice came from outside, "If I were left Imperial Censor, I wouldn't use this item." Ying Kuang's expression turned serious and he asked, "Who's outside?" Footsteps could be heard and a young Taoist dressed in a blue robe walked in. He bowed to him and said, "I am a Qi practitioner from Mount Li Wang. Taoist name is Dongguang." Mount Li Wang? Ying Kuang's expression turned serious. Another disciple of the Supreme Sect. He was not afraid of the other party. As long as he had the heavenly talisman in his hands, no matter how high the person's cultivation was, he could still easily chase him away like before. However, with the interference of a Grand Supreme, it was very likely that his original plan would be disrupted. He said coldly, "I know the consequences of using the talisman. I don't need Taoists to remind me." Dongguang nodded and said, "I've said too much. Since you are the left Imperial Censor, I'm sure you know the implications of this item. However, I'm curious, why did Zhuo Imperial Censor steal the talisman and descend to the lower bound?" He originally thought that this person was already in cahoots with the Tao of Virtue. However, from the looks of it, his goal wasn't that simple. Ying Kuang didn't answer his question. He closed his eyes and only opened them after a while. He asked, "Since Taoist is a disciple of the Supreme Sect, I have something to ask." Dongguang said, "Go ahead." Ying Kuang stared at him and said, "Why has the ruler of the Celestial Court always been a person with the same surname since the world was created?" Dongguang was a little surprised. He didn't expect this question. He thought for a while and replied, "The Celestial Emperor is the ruler of the world and bears the fate of the heavens. He is favored by the world. The Hao clan's fate isn't over yet, and they have the support of the Tao of Virtue. The throne won't fall into the hands of others." He paused and said, "Since you asked about this, do you want to change the world?" Ying Kuang looked at him and said slowly, "Why not?" As if the world felt his treacherous words, there was a sudden rumble above their heads. The wind and clouds changed color and thunder rumbled. Dongguang couldn't help but be surprised. He didn't expect to have such thoughts. No wonder he stole the talisman. With this item in hand, it was possible. He then said seriously, "The left Imperial Censor should know that the Tao of Virtue is protecting the Celestial Court on behalf of the Orthodox sect. It's extremely difficult for you to do what you want. However, if you really want to do it, it's not impossible." Chapter 1905. Dandy Guang thought that Ying Kuang's intention to replace the heavenly court wasn't completely delusional. As long as he had the support of a Grand Supreme and was willing to wait for the heavenly secrets to change, there was still a chance of success. Ying Kuang said solemnly, "I'm not doing this for my own sake. I'm a subject of the heavenly court. If I rebel, I'll be a traitor. My name isn't right and my words won't be justified. I stole the talisman to find a suitable person to entrust this item to. Dandy Guang said non-committally, the heavenly court will not give up on this item. Ying Kuang said sonorously, I'm not afraid no matter how many people from the heavenly court come. Dandy Guang knew that he wasn't bluffing. With the talisman in hand, as long as he was careful, the heavenly court wouldn't be able to do anything to him. However, he didn't understand one thing. Why are you telling me this? Aren't you afraid that it'll be leaked? Ying Kuang said solemnly, I've already committed an unpardonable crime. If the heavenly court learns of this, it'll just add another crime to my list. He looked at Dandy Guang. Moreover, Taoist Grand Supreme doesn't need the talisman. Moreover, Forgotten Parting Mountain isn't a Tao of virtue nor Tao of perfection. I don't have to worry about it. Dandy Guang immediately understood. As Zhang Yan and the two Grand Supreme didn't announce it, outsiders didn't know that Forgotten Parting Mountain had joined the Tao of perfection. Ying Kuang was obviously aware that if he wanted to change the throne, then he needed the support of the Grand Elder. However, no matter if it was the Tao of virtue or the Tao of integrity, these two branches of the Tao lineage had placed their gazes on the princes, and this didn't conform to his wishes. Forgotten Parting Mountain was the only one that hadn't made a clear decision. If someone could support him, then there was only one choice left. He glanced at Ying Kuang. This meant that Ying Kuang had the intention to contact Forgotten Parting Mountain for a long time. At this moment, Ying Kuang continued, today and the world seem to be peaceful, but in fact, within the universe, demons and devils are rising one after another, and evil and filth are growing everywhere, causing the world to be in chaos and the people to be plunged into misery and suffering. Taoist priest Wang Guang, what do you think is the source of this calamity? Dandy Guang didn't mind. I'll have to ask Zhu Yuzhong. I am someone who doesn't care about worldly affairs. Ying Kuang said solemnly, the world isn't clear. In the end, it's because the gods are tyrannical. If we don't get rid of this evil, the world will not be at peace. As soon as he said this, thunder and lightning flashed in the sky. Thunderclaps shook the dragon, and a violent storm suddenly attacked. It was as if the heaven and earth were angry. However, when it reached the top of the house, it was blocked by layers of faint light, unable to enter. Wan Guang said thoughtfully, Gods had existed since the beginning of the world. They were the first living beings at the beginning of the world. The first people of the Taishang sect all came from such living beings. However, most of those ancient gods had already perished, and there weren't many left now. The ones Ying Kuang was referring to were mainly the Celestial Emperor and the Turtle Mother tribe. These people were born with long lifespans, and the rules of the celestial heavens forbade them from cultivating Tao techniques, so they didn't have any divine arts themselves. Instead, they were like mortals, with 7 emotions and 6 desires. Ever since the Hao family became the master of the world, the Hao family and the Turtle Mother tribe grew in numbers. It was obviously impossible for these people to hide in the celestial heavens and follow the rules. Therefore, the usual way was for the celestial heavens to issue an edict and assign them to the lower realm. However, most of them didn't have any abilities, so they only received offerings and didn't have the power to govern. The celestial heavens didn't need food from the mortal world. They only cared about regulating yin and yang, the changes of the 4 seasons, and even the rotation of the sun, moon, and stars. Therefore, almost all the offerings went to these gods. After these people accumulated a large amount of wealth, they didn't just use it for enjoyment, they even used it to raise demons and monsters. They used it to run amok, sometimes invading mortal countries, sometimes breaking the cave abodes of cultivators, making them slaves, and causing chaos in the world. Because he was a member of the Celestial Emperor's Celestial Mother's race, and the people he harmed were mortals and cultivators, unless he really rebelled, everyone would turn a blind eye to him, be it celestial immortals or celestial gods. Most of the chaos in the lower realm was caused by this person. Wan Guang knew that in the beginning, the Celestial Emperor used these people to deal with cultivators who didn't listen to the celestial heavens. They could also use them to continuously deplete the demons and monsters in the world, and they could also keep the Star-Lord host in check. It was like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. However, later on, it deviated from the original intention. He looked at Ying Kuang. To be able to become the left imperial censor and be the personal attendant of the celestial emperor, this person should be a god, and he should be one of the best. However, from the looks of it, it was obvious that he sincerely wanted to overthrow the celestial heavens and eliminate the gods. From this point of view, unless he was really captured by the celestial heavens, it was impossible for him to return the celestial talisman before he achieved his goal. After thinking for a while, he stood up and bowed, saying, "I understand the left imperial censor's intention. I will pass your message to the Grand Supreme. I will take my leave today." Ying Kuang stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "It's not appropriate for me to show my face. Forgive me for not seeing you off." Wan Guang took a step and suddenly thought of something. He took out a talisman from his sleeve and said, "If the left imperial censor is in trouble, you can use this to protect yourself." Ying Kuang seemed to be weighing something. After a while, he still took the item and said, "Thank you." Wan Guang nodded and left the place. He then turned into a rainbow light and flew back. A few days later, he crossed the Realm River and returned to the Forgotten Li Mountain. After reporting, he went to see Zhang Yan and told him what Ying Kuang said. After Zhang Yan learned about it, he smiled faintly. Ying Kuang's idea was not just a delusion. The establishment of the Hao clan was not only recognized by the heaven and earth, but also by the Grand Supreme. However, the reason why the Hao clan could survive for so long was related to these. More importantly, in the celestial court that it controlled, there was something that even the Grand Supreme wanted to fight for. With that, how could a mere heavenly talisman change the heaven and earth? Moreover, the Tao allowed him to bring the heavenly talisman out. After he finished using it, he would have a way to get it back. Therefore, his effort was destined to be in vain. However, since the heavenly talisman was outside, he would not allow the Tao's scheme to succeed so easily. He immediately calculated. Although there were other Grand Supreme hiding the heaven's secrets and all the signs inside were blurry, he could not cut off all of them. He could feel that there would be a chance in the near future. If he succeeded, it would be very beneficial to his side. Therefore, he called a few people over and instructed them to go down the mountain to make arrangements. Half a month later, Jiang returned to the Forgotten Li Mountain again. Compared to when he left, his cultivation had improved by a level. It was obvious that he had gained a lot. He went back to his abode to tidy up before reporting to Yi Guang. Yi Guang listened to his detailed experience and smiled. "Junior Marshal Brother Jie, you have done well this time, and your cultivation level has improved. However, you will not be staying on the mountain for long this time, as there is something that I need your help with." Jie Ying said seriously, "Please tell me." Yi Guang said, "I heard that you were the study companion of the 11th prince?" Jie Ying said, "Yes, he and I were studying Tao under Immortal Dusher. However, other than the prince, the celestial officials were not allowed to cultivate Tao. Therefore, in the name of study companion, I was actually helping him handle the miscellaneous affairs in the residence and the correspondence. Sometimes, I even copied some obscure Tao scriptures for him." He asked curiously, "Why did senior apprentice brother ask about this?" Yi Guang said, "Half a year ago, the 11th prince was banished to the lower realm. He was given the title of Duke Mianwu and his fief was in the Zhiyuan continent." Jie Ying was stunned and said, "The 11th prince was banished?" However, when he thought about it again, he felt that it was inevitable. Back then, many celestial officials, including his father, Dragon King Mi Shui, were either detained or banished. It was probably to cut off the 11th prince's wings. Yi Guang said, "The 11th prince has the emperor's qi and has the potential to inherit the throne in the future. However, the Zhiyuan continent is the territory of demons and demons. Moreover, there are many people who want his life in the dark. Therefore, it is not safe there. You can go and protect him secretly." Jie Ying was enlightened and thought, "No wonder senior apprentice brother Yi Guang wanted me to conceal my identity all these years. It was all for today." He asked, "When do I leave?" Yi Guang said, "The sooner the better." He took out a golden talisman from his sleeve and handed it to Jie Ying. He said, "The enemies you will meet this time are different from the ones you met before. Since it is not convenient for me to show myself, I will give you this talisman to protect yourself. Remember, You have to guard for 20 years. After 20 years, someone will come to help you. Jiang took the talisman and put it away properly. He cupped his hands and said, "Since the matter is so urgent, I will leave the mountain now." Yi Guang said seriously, "Take care, junior apprentice brother." 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. The heavenly talisman was still not found by the heaven court. However, there were constant changes in the heaven hall. The universe was not peaceful, and it caused more turbulence in the human world. At this moment, there was news that the Heaven Emperor wanted to worship immortal Yuhan of Mount Tengshi Mountain as a celestial master. When Zhang Yan heard about this, he knew that the real chaos was coming. Now, the 6 heavenly masters were all people of the Tao of virtue. Although celestial Yuhan was powerful and famous, he was a person of the Tao of virtue. Celestial Emperor did this because he was dissatisfied with the Tao of virtue over the heavenly talisman, so he wanted to use the people of the Tao of virtue to suppress him. Now that immortal Yuhan had set off for the heaven court, the Tao of wholeness must know that the heaven emperor was using them. However, this was a rare opportunity, and they must seize it no matter what. It was believed that the Tao of virtue would do everything possible to stop this. Because once there was a first, there would be a second in the future. After this matter, the Tao of virtue and the Tao of wholeness would most likely turn from a secret fight to an open one. However, not long after the news spread, the Heaven Emperor made another big move. This time, he sealed 12 princes in one go, leaving only the youngest, the 14th prince, in the palace. However, this crown prince had never been valued by anyone, and his mother's clan didn't have much power either. If he were to inherit the throne, it would only cause dissatisfaction among the people. This time, it was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. The celestial officials and deities all came forward to oppose this matter. It was not difficult for Zhang Yan to see that the Heaven Emperor was afraid of using the princes to incite the 2 Tao lineages and the forces of the heavens to fight, so as to clean up the remaining evil and reorganize the heavenly law. However, if he was not careful, there might be a reversal. But since he dared to do this, he must have enough confidence to clean up the situation, or rather, he had a great reliance. He privately believed that this reliance was probably the object that the Grand Elders were fighting over. As the karma around this object increased, the fog of heavenly secrets also slowly dissipated. He could feel that it was not far from the time when he could see the true face of this object. Chapter 1906. Under the Hao family's celestial heavens, other than the heavenly cycle universe that was under the rule, there were 3,000 foreign continents and more than 800 countries. The so-called foreign continents and countries were countries where barbarians and demons lived together. Most of these people ate raw meat and drank blood. They were ignorant and barbaric. Although the tribal chief also worshipped the heavenly court in name, because of the mixture of humans and demons, he refused to be enlightened and followed a different set of rules. Moreover, his existence could attract many demons that were scattered among the people. Since it was a day of its own, it was allowed to exist. There were also immortal officials of the celestial heavens stationed here. Most of them had violated the laws of the celestial heavens and were exiled to this place. These people all knew that this place was filled with a foul atmosphere. The humans were no different from beasts. No matter what, they couldn't be controlled well. Hence, no one had ever tried to govern this place. A few years ago, the 11th imperial prince Hao Ning was exiled to the lower realm. His fief was one of the 800 foreign continents, Yen Lu country. For a crown prince to be sent to such a place was, in fact, a disguised form of exile. Hao Ning was originally favored by the Sky Emperor and had long been accustomed to the flattery of the people around him, but in the blink of an eye, he was beaten down to the ground. His heart was filled with confusion. Fortunately, he was originally open-minded and did not become depressed, nor did he give up because of the difficult situation in front of him. Instead, he actively cleaned up and managed his own fief. What made him distressed was that before he came out, he had been suppressed many times. The people around him either left or were exiled. There weren't many people he could trust now. It was at this time that Jie Ying came over under the orders of the sect. Hao Ning was very happy to see this old friend and immediately gave him a heavy responsibility. Jie Yingben was the dragon prince of Mi Shui Dragon King, so he was very familiar with the management of tribes and countries. What the 11th prince lacked now was manpower, which was very easy for him to solve. He immediately sent out letters to recruit people to help him. After Mi Shui Dragon King was removed, many people also lost their immortal status. There were unavoidable complaints. However, Jing became a disciple of the Grand Sect, so after a while, the complaints died down. Hearing that the imperial prince was recruiting them, they were all overjoyed and came from all over the small and large heaven domains. On the surface, he could no longer be an immortal official, but in the name of a prince's attendant, no one could say anything about it. Not to mention that these people were all dragon species, they were also the water gods in charge of a region. In the past, the people they most often dealt with were demons and demons. Moreover, each of them had a large number of experienced subordinates under them. They were very good at dealing with these demons and ghosts. After they flooded in just a few months, the power of the country was stabilized. Moreover, it was still orderly. The chaos in the past was no longer seen. Because of this, Hao Ning's spirit was slightly lifted. He felt that even if he couldn't return to the heaven court, he could still achieve something in the lower realm. Not long after, he received a piece of news that he didn't know if he should be happy or worried about. Almost all of the princes had been conferred, and now, they were recruiting gods from all over the place, doing their best to expand their own forces. On the surface, it seemed like the Heaven Sovereign wanted his princes to compete with each other, and the winner might be the one to succeed the throne. But in this way, he seemed to have a chance. It was just that he couldn't be compared to his brothers, be it in terms of foundation or subordinates. Fortunately, the location of the fief was too far away, so it wouldn't attract too much attention. He still had enough time to prepare. Moreover, he also knew that Jie Ying had joined the Forgotten Li Mountain. Although he didn't say it explicitly, it was enough to say that he might be assisting him. And with the support of a grand elder behind him, he was full of confidence. At the foot of Mt Mi Bo in the Apricot continent, flags swayed in the clouds, and drums were beating. On the ground, countless demon soldiers were besieging a mountain gate of Qi practitioners. On a jade platform not far away, a handsome young man dressed in luxurious clothes with a jade belt around his waist was surrounded like a moon surrounded by stars. Beside him were immortal officials of the heaven court and gods of the continent. This was the second prince, Hao Ji, the son of the heaven sovereign and mother Liao. He was also the most favored person of the Tao of virtue. At this moment, he looked at the Qi practitioners who were forced to not dare to show themselves under the countless monster arrows. He couldn't help but twitch his mouth and sneered. It said that Qi practitioners are powerful and can compete with the heaven court's generals. But now, it seems that they are just SOSO. One of the people beside him looked at the Conquest Square seal floating in the clouds and hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't say anything. The rest of the people also remained silent. None of them had any intention of standing up to correct him. Although Hao Ji's behavior was frivolous now, he wasn't like this when he was in the heaven court. Instead, he was generous and humble. In fact, this was his true nature. When he was in the heaven court, because he was close to the heaven sovereign, he was always cautious and didn't dare to go against the rules. But when he was outside, he felt that no one was controlling him, so his behavior became arrogant. Seeing that the mountain gate was about to be broken, an immortal official beside him suggested, "Your Highness, the Qi practitioners of the Alcade Cave were originally established by the ancient Great Virtue. They have always been respectful to the heaven court. It's just that they were bewitched by some scoundrels a few days ago. I hope that the prince can give them another chance." Hao Ji snorted and said, "I never have the patience to say it twice. Since they rejected me when I tried to recruit them last time, how can I not grant them their wish?" He said to the people around him, "Break the mountain gate slightly and send all the disciples to the netherworld. None of them are allowed to stay in the world." The people around him responded loudly. The immortal official sighed. He knew that he would anger this person if he continued to persuade him. So, he shook his head and left. At this moment, Hao Ji suddenly thought of something and asked, "Speaking of which, how is my brother now?" The person he was talking about was the eldest son of the Heaven Sovereign. Just like him, he was also born from the fetal blood of the Heaven Sovereign Mother. It was just that he was slow and honest, so he wasn't favored by the Heaven Sovereign Mother. But now that he was in the lower realm, he realized that what he saw in the past might not be the truth. Maybe his brother had ulterior motives like him. Someone replied, "Your Highness, I've already ordered people to keep an eye on him." After the Crown Prince went to the fief, he moved mountains and chiseled walls, opened rivers to store water, and summoned officials to create clouds and rain to irrigate the barren fields. During this period, he also killed many gods who violated the rules. As for the rest, there's nothing else. Hao Ji was a little surprised, but he smiled and said, "Oh, it seems that my brother is still so kind and loves the people." In fact, he didn't think much of it. The Heaven Court was the Heaven Court of the gods after all. Instead of winning over the people of the Heaven Court, he went to please the mortals. What was the use of that? But this way he could rest assured. He thought that after he inherited the throne, he would casually exile his brother to a barren land and let him do whatever he wanted. Apart from him and his brother, the other crown princes were all born from the heavenly concubines. So what if they were powerful? When the time came, all he needed was an edict from his mother to strip them of their power. Therefore, he didn't care about these people at all. While they were talking, the cave abode had already been breached. Many monster soldiers swarmed in. Not long after, a servant came to report that the cave abode had been wiped out and no one was left out. Hao Chu grunted in response. As he swept his gaze across, everyone's eyes involuntarily avoided his gaze. He was quite satisfied with this outcome. Today, he had not only come to intimidate those disobedient Qi practitioners, he had also used this opportunity to establish his might. Now, it seemed that his objective had been achieved. A servant girl came up with a jade plate and presented it to Hao Ji. He lifted up a piece of red silk that was covering the plate and took a look. A ray of light came out and made his body feel refreshed. He smiled and said, "Is this the treasure of the Alcade Cave, the magic cloud pearl? It looks interesting." He covered the red silk back and waved his hand, "Take it to mother." The servant girl said yes and left. Just as he was about to leave, a golden light shone down from the sky. Then, a female deity appeared and bowed to him. She presented a jade letter with both hands and said, "Your Highness, a letter from the Empress of Heaven has arrived." Hao Ji quickly said, "Quickly present it." When he opened the letter and read it, he was surprised at first, and then revealed a strange expression. He muttered in his heart, "My little sister, she is too bold. This time, Empress Mother will definitely punish her heavily." What was written on the letter was that Heavenly Mother's favorite daughter, by Qi Fairy, who was also his sister, had secretly married a mortal in the mortal world. This matter had actually happened a long time ago, but no one had leaked it. Now, this fairy had already given birth to a pair of children for that mortal. Such a scandal had actually spread about Celestial Emperor's daughter. If it was spread out, would the Tian family still have any face left? Therefore, Heavenly Mother sent a letter and asked him to find a way to capture her daughter and secretly send her to Yuan Tian Palace. He didn't dare to hesitate. He sent 2 of his trusted subordinates over and gave them a few strict instructions. Then he left the matter to them. At this moment, within a certain part of the Star Department, a flower boat was moving amidst the clouds, and a man and a woman were standing on it. The man was 9 feet tall and had a dignified appearance. The woman wore a set of palace clothes and had a peerlessly beautiful appearance. She held 2 children in her arms, and even though she was riding on the wind and the clouds, her face was filled with worry. At this moment, 2 Taoists suddenly appeared in the sky. One of them rushed forward and bowed, saying, "Are you by Qi Fairy?" The woman immediately revealed a vigilant expression and said, "Who are you?" The Taoist said, "Fairy, don't ask who I am. I have no ill intentions. It's just that Empress Heaven has already sent a letter to the second prince. The people who are here to capture you are already on their way." The woman's expression didn't change, but there was an additional trace of worry in the depths of her eyes. She bowed and said, "Thank you, Taoist, for telling me." The Taoist said, "Forgive me for being blunt, but if you continue like this, you won't be able to escape." The woman looked at the Taoist and said, "Taoist, do you have a good plan?" The Taoist said, "If you have nowhere to go, you might as well go to Mount Liwang. Perhaps you will be able to solve your problem." As he said this, he bowed and disappeared with the other Taoist. Seeing the two of them disappear, the woman bit her lips and thought for a while. Finally, she seemed to have made a decision. She turned the flower boat around and changed its direction, escaping in the direction of another border river. At this moment, in the clouds, the Taoist looked at the flower boat in the distance and smiled. "It's done." The other person seemed to be a little nervous and said, "Senior brother, is it really appropriate to do this? After all, this matter involves the Grand Elder of Mount Liwang. If he blames..." The Taoist glanced at him and said mockingly, "Junior brother, what are you afraid of? Since Master has instructed this, it must have been instructed by the Patriarch. Everything will be taken care of by the Patriarch. Why do you need to worry about this? This time is considered successful. You and I should quickly go back and report." Chapter 1907. Inside the temple on Mount Liwang, Zhang Yan was sitting on the jade platform. His mind was wandering around the universe, observing the mysteries of the outside world. Suddenly, he felt a surge of emotions. His eyes flickered, and after a little calculation, he immediately knew what had happened. It was obvious that someone was plotting against him and wanted to drag him into this mess. However, the mysteries of heaven were covered, and it was hard to know whether it was Quan Dao or Dao. However, there was one thing he was clear about. Since the two factions had begun to fight, it was obvious that they would not allow him to stay out of it. They would definitely think of a way to make him stand on the stage. Long before he joined hands with Quan Dao, he had already guessed that this day would come, so he was already prepared. However, it was hard to predict when it would happen, and now it had finally happened. However, there were pros and cons to everything. Good and bad were not absolute. Advantages could turn into disadvantages, and disadvantages could also turn into advantages. For example, in the eyes of outsiders, this matter might be a problem, but he thought that it might be an opportunity. As long as it was done properly, it might even be of help. At this moment, there was a flower boat riding on the clouds on the bank of the World River outside of Mount Liwang. However, after a few attempts, it still could not find a way to get out. The man on the boat saw that something was wrong and asked with concern, "Lady Qi, is there something wrong?" Bai Qi deity forced a smile and said, "Husband, it's nothing. It's just that the location of the Grand Supreme is unfathomable. I am looking for the entrance. Husband, please wait for a moment, I will definitely be able to find it." The man said, "Lady Qi, if it doesn't work..." Bai Qi deity interrupted him and said, "It will definitely work." Seeing that the man stopped talking, she felt that her tone was a bit heavy, so she said softly, "Husband, mother has already sent brother to chase after us. If we turn around now, it will be too late. Since that Taoist pointed us here, then he will definitely be able to find the way out." She originally wanted to hide at the great prince's place. With her big brother's generous nature, he would definitely accept them. However, she also understood her second brother. He would definitely not go against mother's orders. Not to mention that there might be people chasing after them, there would definitely be many obstacles in front of them. Now that they were going to the Forgottenly Mountain, it would definitely be out of her second brother's expectations, and there would be a chance of survival. The man sighed and said, "I heard from my wife that this Grand Elder doesn't know you. Are you really willing to help us?" Bai Qi Fairy unconsciously hugged her children tightly and said, "I have heard that the Dragon King of Overflowing Water committed a great crime." Later, the Dragon Crown Prince begged the Grand Elder to pardon him. "Even if the Grand Elder is not willing to accept us, as long as he allows us to build a hut at the foot of the mountain, we can escape from brother's pursuit." She knew very well that the Celestial Court was afraid that the news about her would be spread out, so they would not make a big fuss about it. They would only try their best to cover it up. If she could really hide in the Liwang Mountain, then her mother would most likely pretend that it was the truth in order to prevent the news from leaking out. She would spread the news that she had joined the Li Wang mountain to cultivate Tao. Therefore, the chances were not small. When the man heard what she said, his worry lessened slightly. Bai Chi Fairy continued to look for a way out, but at this time, the clouds suddenly parted, and two divine generals landed in front of the boat. One of them cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Bai Chi Fairy. The two of us are Second Prince's attendants. We are here on Second Prince's orders to bring Fairy back." A trace of anxiety flashed in Bai Chi Fairy's eyes. She did not expect them to catch up so quickly, but she still maintained a calm expression. She said with a straight face, "Go back and tell my second brother that I don't need him to teach me what to do. You can go back." The divine general was not moved and said, "When we came, His Highness ordered us to bring Fairy back. Please don't make things difficult for us." Bai Chi Fairy became more and more uneasy. She guessed that these two people had only arrived here first, and there should be more people chasing after them. If she did not think of a way to enter the Forgotten Li Mountain now, then she would never be able to leave. At this time, white gas suddenly moved, and a path opened up on the border river. The two divine generals did not seem to notice it. Bai Chi Fairy's eyes lit up, and she controlled the boat to turn around and head in. The two immortal generals only felt their vision blur, and then the flower boat disappeared without a trace. They looked at each other, completely clueless about what had happened. After a while, one of them said hesitantly, "Brother, do you think this is the Grand Supreme's doing?" The other person said uneasily, "It should be so." The two of them looked at each other. Since this matter involved the Grand Supreme, it was not their fault. Furthermore, they did not dare to stay here any longer, so they hurriedly left. The flower boat followed the path and quickly reached the other side of the border river. Then they saw a Taoist standing in the sky. Bai Chi Fairy bowed and said, "Just now, is it Taoist Zhang who is helping us? Bai Chi thanks you here." Dongguang returned the bow and said, "The two of you, the Grand Supreme already knows of your arrival and is waiting in the palace. Please follow me." Bai Chi Fairy and her husband followed him up the mountain, and they quickly arrived at the palace at the peak of the mountain. After reporting at the door, they were invited in. Inside, they saw a young Taoist in a black robe sitting on a jade platform. Bai Chi Fairy had also followed Yun Tianmu to see the three Grand Supreme of Virtue, Tao and Tao. This person was very similar to them in terms of ethereal and unfathomable. She immediately went forward and bowed, saying gratefully, "Bai Chi greets the Grand Supreme. Thank you for saving us." The man beside her put down the pair of children he was carrying and also bowed. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Although I let the two of you enter the mountain this time, it was not to save the two of you." Bai Chi Fairy was a little confused and said, "Then why did the Grand Supreme?" Zhang Yan didn't say anything. Dandy Guang stood up and said, "The Patriarch said that the two of you have a tribulation ahead of you and that there is no benefit in staying here. However, your children are fated with Li Wang." Bai Chi Fairy immediately lowered her head and did not say anything. Even though she knew that this was an excellent choice, how could she bear to abandon the two children? The man struggled for a moment, but he closed his eyes and kowtowed heavily. He said, "Then I'll leave my children in the hands of the Grand Supreme." Bai Chi Fairy's expression changed slightly, and she said, "Husband Thu?" The man said solemnly, Qin Yang, your husband is incompetent. I caused the three of you to wander around with me. However, we are not fated to stay here. As a father, how can I bear to see my children suffer? Now that we can worship the Grand Supreme Tao Ancestor, even if we are separated from our flesh and blood, we can still look forward to the immortal path in the future. What is there to worry about?" Dongguang said, "The two of you, this is not a separation of life and death. If you escape the tribulation in the future, you can still see each other." When Bai Chi Fairy heard this, her heart moved. It seemed that the Grand Supreme was using these words to tell her that after the tribulation in the future, they would be reunited one day. After thinking for a moment, she did not insist and said, "Then let's do as you say." After the two of them settled, they kowtowed heavily. After getting up, Bai Chi Fairy put down her children with tears in her eyes and left with the man. Zhang Yan looked at the two children. After all, half of them had the blood of the immortal clan. They were born different, If they cultivated the Tao, they would far surpass mortals. The two of them could not be compared at all. He instructed, Danguang, you will teach these two children the Tao. Danguang immediately followed the order. At this moment, Zhang Yan calculated again. Because Bai Qi Fairy and her husband had just now entered Forgottenly Mountain, there was a gap in the heaven's secrets. He immediately identified that the person who dragged him into this situation was from the line of Tao of Virtue. Although he had already entered the complete Tao and was considered an enemy, Tao of Virtue did not know about this. Now that he was provoked, he should respond. He said, "Where is Qingguang?" There was a flash of light in the hall, and a tall and skinny Taoist appeared. He carried two swords on his back and had a sharp gaze. He bowed and said, "Patriarch, disciple is here." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "The evil and filthy qi in the apricot continent is getting thicker. Go and kill all the demons and devils here." Qingguang replied solemnly, "Disciple obeys." After saying this, he turned into a beam of light and broke through heaven and earth. A few days later, there was thunder and lightning in the apricot continent like swords. It swept through heaven and earth like a flood plowing the ground. In just one night, all the demons and devils in the continent were killed, but the mortals and many living beings were unharmed. When the second prince, Hao Chu, heard about this, he was furious. Although he had been given a title, he could not command the celestial generals and celestial soldiers. If he wanted to expand his power, he could only recruit demon soldiers. Now that everyone in his generation had been killed, how could he compete with the other princes? The key was that he did not know what the problem was. He took out a golden seal with a cold face. With a gentle shake, a golden armored deity appeared in front of him. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness, what orders do you have?" Hao Chu said, "Last night, an enemy attacked my family. I order you to quickly capture them." The deity said expressionlessly, "Your Highness, without the Heaven Court's order, I cannot capture them." Hao Chu was displeased and said angrily, "I am the son of the celestial monarch. Are you going to turn a blind eye when someone attacked me?" The celestial being said, "That Qi practitioner only killed the demons. They are not citizens of the Heaven Court. Furthermore, your Highness was not harmed at all. Hence, I am unable to accept this order. I hope your Highness can forgive me." Hao Chu was even more furious. He pointed at the deity and said, "A mere cultivator dares to do as he pleases in my territory. Yet you are afraid of him. Where is the dignity of the Heaven Court? I will report you to my father." The deity said, "Your Highness, the attacker is from the Taishang sect. He is not someone I can control." The Taishang sect? Hao Chu's expression turned ugly. Why the Taishang sect? He knew that although the Heaven Court only worshipped the Tao of Virtue, it did not mean that they could ignore the other Taishang sects and worship them in the side palace. Even the celestial monarch did not want to interfere in matters involving the Taishang sect. He could only pressure them through the Tao of Virtue and the other Taishang sects. Hao Chu was just a prince, so he could not do anything about it. Seeing that he did not speak anymore, the deity cupped his hands and left in a golden light. Hao Chu's expression was ferocious. He kicked the table in front of him and said angrily, "Why is the Taishang sect making things difficult for me?" The servant beside him said carefully, "Your Highness, I heard that the two servants chased Bai Qi Fairy all the way to the foot of Mount Liwang. Could it be?" Hao Chu's expression turned gloomy. He cursed, "Those two idiots." However, after cursing, he felt more uneasy. It would not be a good thing if he was targeted by a Taishang. He had to think of a countermeasure. Thus, he ordered the servant, "Prepare a generous gift for me. I want to go to Mount Zeek personally to worship the three Tao ancestors." Chapter 1908. Not long after Zhang Yan let Fairy Bai Qi and her husband go down the mountain, a servant of the heavenly court was ordered by Heavenly Mother to come to Mount Liwang. He carefully inquired about whether the Grand Supreme intended to accept Fairy Bai Qi and her husband as disciples. In fact, if that was the case, both the Heavenly Emperor and Heavenly Mother could accept it. Even if the man was once a mortal, if he became a disciple of the Grand Supreme with Fairy Bai Qi, they would not be able to explain themselves. Don Guang was ordered to reply that the pair of children were fated with Mount Li Wang, so the Grand Supreme General took them in. As for Fairy Bai Qi and her husband, they had nothing to do with them and were sent down the mountain long ago. After Heavenly Mother got the news, she did not dare to say anything more. She secretly sent people to search for her daughter. After Fairy Bai Qi and her husband left Mount Li Wang, they were surprised to find that no one was following them. This was because after the second prince learned his lesson, he was afraid of provoking Mount Li Wang, so he called back all his people and did not dare to care about this matter anymore. In addition, the heavenly court deliberately concealed this matter, so the two of them took this opportunity to escape safely. The two of them still remembered what Zhang Yan said. They still had a calamity to escape, so they concealed their identities and temporarily lived in seclusion at the border of Yu country. Great Zhou Jiliang said. Dust and sand filled the air, and yellow soil flew in the air. Left Imperial Advisor Ying Kuang was wearing a loose robe and walking on the official road. Beside him was a lively young man who was about 10 years old. He carried a tall bamboo basket on his back, and a small beast that looked like a cat or a fox squatted on it. Its black eyes blinked from time to time. Ying Kuang looked in front of him. He said, "Pingxing, there is a village 60 miles away. You and I will rest there." The young man said, "Yes, master." The two of them walked very fast. They were dozens of miles away, but they arrived in less than an hour. However, when they entered the village, they saw that the place was in ruins. The fields were dry, and the villagers were in rags. Everyone's faces were ashen, and their expressions were numb. The young man turned his head and saw that in front of a half-collapsed house, there was a skinny child looking at them with his finger in his mouth. Although he had followed his master all the way, he had seen such scenes everywhere he went. However, he still couldn't help but reveal a pained expression. Ying Kuang said in a deep voice, "In this lifetime, the root of all the evil in the world today is the celestial beings. You must remember, in the future, when you have achieved success in your cultivation, you must kill all the celestial beings and cleanse the world." If what he said before was a bit extreme, then he wasn't wrong in the slightest. There were many princes who had been conferred titles. In order to maintain the demon soldiers, he had to reach out to the celestial beings. This was because the celestial court did not only include the fiefdom under their rule, but also the people in the fiefdom. Therefore, from a legal point of view, all the celestial beings in the fiefdom were the people of the celestial court and had to offer sufficient offerings to the celestial court. On the other hand, the accumulation of deities came from the kingdoms in the mortal world, and the wealth of the kingdoms came from the commoners. The burden was passed down layer by layer, and in the end, it was still the people at the bottom who suffered. Especially in the Great Zhou dynasty, there were no states or prefectures that were still peaceful. Instead, there were more and more demons, and the people were destitute and homeless. The rich families formed camps to fight against the government, which led to a sharp decrease in taxes. The imperial court was pressured by the gods and had no choice but to step up their exploitation. Now, the country was in a state of decline. Pingxing nodded his head seriously and said, "Master, I will remember." After thinking for a while, he asked, "Master, when can I kill the celestial beings?" Ying Kuang looked in a direction, and after a while, he said in a deep voice, "The time is not right, let's wait a little longer." ZK Mountain, where the ancestral court of the Path of Virtue was located. The three Taishang transcended the world and were not involved in the mortal world. Therefore, they usually did not care about the affairs of the world, and all the affairs were handled by the disciples. Among the disciples, the three perfected immortals, Jilu, Jichang, and Jixing, were the leaders. Today, it was Taoist Ji Li's turn to preach. In the middle of the courtyard, it was filled with the disciples and cultivators of the sect. Among them, there were also some rogue immortals who were attached to the Path of Virtue. These people all came from the heavens continent to listen to the preaching. Once the time was up, Taoist Ji Lu went up on stage to preach. The preaching went on for a few days, and as the people listened to him, they gradually became engrossed in the preaching. Not long after, they felt like they had forgotten about everything, as if they had become one with the heavens. Then, a chime was heard, and they woke up just now. They heard the child saying, "Today's preaching ends, please leave." The people stood up, bowed to the stage, and then left. However, some people who came from afar stayed on the mountain, preparing to listen to the preaching next time. After Taoist Ji Lu returned to his abode, a child standing in front of the courtyard said with a clear voice, "Grandmaster, the Celestial Court's second prince is here." Taoist Ji Lu stroked his beard and said, "How long has he been here?" The child said, 3 days, he has been waiting at the foot of the mountain." Taoist Ji Lu waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Call him up for a chat." The child obeyed and left. When Hao Qiu arrived at the hall, he saw Taoist Ji Lu, Taoist Ji Chang, and Taoist Ji Sheng sitting on cattail hassocks, high up on the jade platform, and on both sides stood hundreds of Taoists. Since he came here, he didn't dare to put on any airs as a celestial court's prince, so he put away his arrogance and went forward, cupping his hands, and said, "Celestial Court's Prince Hao Qiu greets the 3 celestial masters." Taoist Ji Lu said in a warm tone, "Why did the Celestial Court's prince come here?" Hao Qiu took a deep breath and showed an expression of righteous indignation. He said, "Reporting to the 3 celestial masters, ever since I was given the title by my father, everything was going smoothly for me to manage my fief and to recruit people, but not long ago, the supreme sect of Forgottenly Mountain suddenly came to my fief and slaughtered my servants, causing my house to be empty, so I came to seek justice from the celestial masters." The more he spoke, the angrier he got, and towards the end, his tone also involuntarily became higher. Taoist Ji Sheng, who was sitting on the left, said lightly, "What kind of justice do you want?" Hao Qiu's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't dare to say the words that he had prepared to say. His eyes darted around for a moment, then he said carefully, "I don't want anything else, but if the Forgottenly Mountain continues to make things difficult for my family, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to ascend to the throne in the future." He paused, then slowly raised his head. "I'm afraid that the celestial masters wouldn't want to see that happen, right?" Taoist Ji Lu chuckled. Hao Qiu, on the other hand, felt a little guilty for no reason. Taoist Ji Lu smiled and said, "Your Highness, you don't have to worry about this. What kind of person is the Supreme Sect? Why would he make things difficult for you? This matter was caused by the carelessness of one of my disciples, who provoked the Forgottenly Mountain. You happened to be there, so this happened. In fact, you've taken the blame on his behalf." Hao Qiu was stunned. Although he didn't understand what was going on, he knew that he was implicated, so he instantly became braver and said, "Then, what do the celestial masters think we should do?" Taoist Ji Lu said, "Your Highness, you can go by yourself. Since this matter was caused by the Tao of virtue, we will naturally give you an explanation." Hao Qiu didn't dare to say anything more and said, "Then, I'll leave it to the celestial masters." He cupped his hands and turned to leave the hall under the guidance of the boy. At this moment, Taoist Ji Lu said, "Are Chang Zhou and Chang Ming back?" A boy replied, "They came back a few days ago." Taoist Ji Lu said, "Summon them to the hall." Not long after, the 2 Taoists who guided by Chi Fairy to the Forgottenly Mountain came to the hall and bowed to Taoist Ji Lu, saying, "Greetings, Master, Uncle Masters." Taoist Ji Sheng suddenly asked, "Chang Zhou, Chang Ming, who let you 2 act on your own and lead by Chi Fairy to the Forgottenly Mountain?" Chang Zhou was stunned and involuntarily looked at Taoist Ji Lu, saying, "Master, didn't you let us act on our own and find a way to expose the Forgottenly Mountain to the eyes of the world?" Taoist Ji Lu sighed and shook his head, saying, "But when did I let you lead Princess to the Forgottenly Mountain?" This, Chang Zhou opened his mouth. When Taoist Ji Lu sent him down the mountain, although he didn't say it explicitly, it was clearly what he meant. Otherwise, why would he tell him about Bai Chi Fairy? But the situation now, he subconsciously looked to his left and right and saw that both his senior and junior brothers were looking at him indifferently. His body trembled and he lowered his head, saying, "Yes, it's our fault." Taoist Ji Lu sighed and said, "Since no one else was behind this and it was all your own doing, I can't be biased." Taoist Ji Sheng said coldly, "What else do you 2 have to say?" Chang Zhou and Chang Ming looked at each other and bowed, saying, "It's our fault, we'll let you punish us." Taoist Ji Sheng said yes and waved the jade ruler in his hand, sealing the magic power of the two, and said, "Guards, send them to the astral peak and detain them." When Chang Zhou and Chang Ming heard the two words astral peak, their faces turned pale and they trembled. A few attendants came forward and carried them away. The Taoists standing on both sides looked at them indifferently. There was no sympathy in their eyes. In their opinion, since Chang Zhou and Chang Ming were pushed out to do something, they had to bear the consequences themselves. If it was done properly, nothing would happen. But now that there was a problem, the sect had to take care of it for you. How could there be such a good thing in the world? Of course, we'll punish you. Taoist Ji Lu waved his horsetail whisk and said, "All of you can leave." The disciples bowed and left the hall along the two sides. After everyone left, Taoist Ji Lu turned his head to the right and said, "Patriarch has already decided on the matter of the Forgotten Li Mountain and wrote a letter here. Junior brother Ji Chang, to show his sincerity, send it to the Grand Elder of the Forgotten Li Mountain." Taoist Ji Chang stood up and bowed. "Yes, Dharma decree." He bade farewell to the two and left the Purple Arc Mountain. With a change of his chi, he arrived in front of the border river after a few teleportations. After that, he didn't move forward anymore. Instead, he bowed and took out the letter. He said loudly, "Virtuous Dao Jichang greets the Grand Elder. I'm here on the orders of my sect's patriarch to deliver a letter." As soon as he finished speaking, a young Taoist came out and bowed to him. "I'm Dongguang, fellow Taoist, please take a seat on the mountain." Taoist Ji Chang returned the greeting and politely declined. "No, I still have important matters to attend to and can't stay any longer. Here's the letter, please pass it to your sect's patriarch." He bowed again and left without asking for the result. Dongguang took a look at the letter and saw the dazzling light above it, causing his soul to shake. He couldn't help but frown, feeling that the other party didn't come with good intentions. He turned around and returned to the main hall on the mountain peak. He raised his hands and presented it. "Here's the letter, please read it, Patriarch." Chapter 1909. Zhang Yan focused his gaze, and the letter flew out of Dandylight's hand and landed in front of him. With a flash of golden light, the letter opened in front of him. This letter was written by a supreme elder of the Tao of Virtue. At the beginning, it was a greeting. Then, it mentioned that the disciples who had caused trouble for the Forgotten Mountain had been punished. Then, it changed the topic and hoped that he could rein in his disciples and not make things difficult for the second prince. After that, they would invite him to come out of the mountain, and together with the Tao of Virtue, they would expel the entire Tao. When the new monarch succeeded the throne, they could order the celestial court to build another hall outside of the main hall to worship him. If he wasn't willing to do so, then it would be best for him to say that he wouldn't help either side and seal the mountain. That way, the Tao wouldn't come looking for trouble with him. Even though the tone of the letter was calm, it was clearly condescending and didn't allow for refusal. Moreover, it carried a faint trace of threat. Furthermore, from his attitude of not wanting to reply to the letter, it seemed that he wasn't afraid that he wouldn't give in. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. The letter suddenly turned into specks of golden light and dissipated in the hall. Even if it wasn't for the fact that the Tao's conditions were akin to charity, he would never agree to them. Because the Tao was the one benefiting from the order of the world, he did not wish to see any changes in the universe the most. If he wanted to invade the universe, the Tao was the first obstacle that he had to overcome. He and the Tao were natural enemies. After he dismissed Wang Guang, he began to ponder. Celestial the Arch and Heavenly Mother Turtle only had two sons, the eldest son of Celestial the Arch, Hao Zheng, and the second disciple, Hao Kuei. From the perspective of inheriting the throne, Hao Zheng, the eldest son of the first wife, was the best choice. Moreover, he was generous and honest. No matter who he treated, he was always gentle and modest. He truly had a human heart. The celestial officials had always praised him for this. However, this person was stubborn and loved the people more than he loved himself. He had said many times that once he ascended to the throne, he would remove the authority of the deities. This was something that the Sky King did not like. Not only that, he was very dissatisfied with the disciples of the Tao of Virtue taking offerings from the celestial heavens for no reason. He even said in front of others that he would find a way to remove these offerings one day. Such words and actions caused the Tao of Virtue to think that he was not a suitable candidate to be the next emperor. Since there was no better choice, both parties turned their attention to the second prince, Hao Ji. Zhang Yan knew that this was only what it looked like on the surface. The Tao only needed the successor to the throne to continue worshipping them. As long as it was a descendant of the Hao family, it was fine. He didn't need to care about who it was. Just like how Quan Dao could choose the third prince and the 11th prince, the Tao had other choices besides the second prince in order to be safe. This time, he had ordered Qingguang to attack, but he had found out that the second prince was much more important to Zeke Mountain than he had expected. Or rather, the other chess piece had not matured yet, and the second prince was still needed to stand in front. If he could find it, he would be able to destroy the Tao of Virtue's arrangements. He believed that Quan Dao was also looking for this person, or perhaps he had already confirmed it. However, since Quan Dao and the others did not discuss this matter with him, it seemed that they did not intend to take the initiative to tell him. Actually, he didn't have a good impression of Quan Dao either. It was just that before the Tao was expelled, he had no choice but to borrow his strength. In the past, the complete path rarely suppressed the virtuous path. Therefore, he similarly needed his support now. Therefore, before the two sides overturned the virtuous path, their basic interests were the same. However, some small conflicts were also unavoidable. He thought that if he went to report, the Tao would definitely reveal it, but there was also a possibility that the Tao would say that he didn't know. Since that was the case, he might as well ignore them and do things according to his own way. After thinking about it, he summoned Qingguang, gave him some instructions, and ordered him to go down the mountain again. Then, he meditated and waited for the situation to change. In a flash, 2 years had passed. Ever since the Bai Qi couple had settled at the border of the Soaring Dragon country, they had lived in peace for almost 3 years. During this time, they had given birth to a son. Because no one had come to find them, the two of them had thought of bringing back a pair of children. However, some tribulations could not be avoided. For the sake of the battle for the throne, the princes of the lower realms could not help but attack each other. Most of the demons and ghosts under their command were recruited from the other countries of the continent. This also caused the demons in the country to all go to serve them when they heard about it. One day, a group of demon soldiers broke into the village where the two of them were staying. Not only did they burn, kill, and loot, they also ate the flesh and blood of the villagers. The Bai Qi fairy couldn't bear it and killed the group of demon soldiers. This scene happened to be seen by an immortal official who went to recruit demon soldiers. Because he was once a prince's attendant, he immediately recognized the identity of the Bai Qi fairy. After seeing that she was married to a mortal man, he was extremely shocked. However, he also knew that this matter involved too much, and it wasn't something a small immortal official like him could get involved in. Thus, not only did he not dare to make it public at first, but he also covered up the matter. Until half a year later, because he accidentally knocked over the golden cup that the celestial emperor had bestowed upon him during a banquet, the prince he served was punished and arrested. The prince said that he would be executed and then sent to the underworld. Because of this, he was resentful and revealed the matter. This matter could no longer be covered up. Soon, the whole world knew about it. The Heavenly Mother was furious and sent people to capture them again. This time, the Bai Qi fairy and her husband didn't escape. The Bai Qi fairy was punished to be imprisoned under the Heaven Root altar and was guarded by the Red Dragon. Her husband, Lin Shuyang, was forced to swallow the revival fruit and was thrown into the Inferno prison to suffer the pain of refining his body every day. However, for some reason, the Heavenly Mother didn't make things difficult for the children they gave birth to. Instead, she took them with her and raised them herself. Although Zhang Yan was at the Forgottenly Mountain, nothing in the world could be hidden from him. He saw everything that happened here. He immediately called for Dongguang and asked, "How is the progress of the two children?" Dongguang replied, "Ancestral Master, Lin Huaizhan and Lin Er's progress is very fast. Although they have only cultivated for a few years, It is equivalent to 100 years for a normal person. He put his hands together and a light screen appeared in his palms. A young man and woman around the age of 15 or 16 were cultivating there. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. They were worthy of being the disciples of the gods. When they came up the mountain, they still looked like children. However, after 2 years, they had already grown to the age of a normal young man and woman. Not only their bodies, but their minds had also caught up. However, only the descendants of the celestial emperor and heavenly mother would have such miraculous changes. Moreover, they were very rare. As far as he knew, among the princes, only the eldest prince was like this. As for the normal gods, they only had longevity and were no different from the mortals of the lower realm. He said, "These two can go down the mountain to train. Send Lin Huaizhan to Jie Ying's place and Lin Yingquang's place. They will naturally have their own fortunes." After Dongguang received the decree, he went to make the arrangements. When Lin Huaizhan and Lin heard that the sect was letting them go down the mountain to train, they were very happy. After bidding farewell to Dongguang, they went their separate ways according to the sect's instructions. However, they did not think of rescuing their parents. This was because when they entered the sect, Dongguang had sealed a part of their memories to prevent them from distracting themselves from cultivating. He planned to release it only after they had achieved some success in their cultivation. Lin Huaizhan rode on the clouds and went straight to Yanlu country. A few days later, he arrived at the country's zombies. He descended and followed the aura to find Jie Ying's residence. After reporting to Jie Ying, he first handed over a letter that Dongguang had written. After a while, someone invited him in. Jie Ying was very happy to see Lin Huaizhan. After being sent down the mountain, he kept in constant contact with the sect, but in the end, he didn't receive much support. Lin Huaizhan's arrival gave him some confidence. On the same day, he reported this matter to second Prince Hao Ning. When Hao Ning knew that Mount Li Wang was coming, he took this matter very seriously. Among all the princes, Hao Ning appeared to be the weakest. This was because he had never recruited demon soldiers, and because he was demoted, there was not a single true god in Zhou country. However, because of this, his rule was the most stable. However, he also knew that this stability was not stable. Before his eyes, there were already a few princes who requested for him to give up the offerings under his rule. Otherwise, they would come and take it themselves. Under such circumstances, he really needed strong support. At this moment, the Forgotten King Mountain had officially dispatched a disciple here, and it was an extremely good piece of news, and it would give him a little more confidence to deal with the upcoming expedition of those imperial princes. Zhou country, Shishang said. On a dirt platform in a ruined state city, a fierce demon with a goat's head and a human body was tied up by a chi lock. It was kneeling on the ground. However, its ferocity did not diminish. It stared at Yin Kuang and his disciple with bloodshot eyes. Yin Kuang said in a deep voice, "Ping Sheng, I will leave this demon to you." Ping Sheng replied and walked to the front. He chanted, "The sky darkens and the earth darkens. The netherworld serves me. Gather fire as yang, transform blood into yin." As he chanted, a blood-red formation will spun under the goat-headed demon's feet. Then, a blood-red light soared up like a flame. In a flash, the demon's flesh and blood melted away, leaving only a skeleton on the ground. Ping Xing wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "Master?" Yin Kuang nodded and said, "Yes. Among all the talismans, Xue Wu's ferocity is the heaviest. You can control it and your mind will not be blinded. I will teach you Li Shu now." Ping Xing said happily, "Thank you, Master." Yin Kuang grunted in acknowledgement. Apart from the Dao techniques that he had cultivated, he mainly relied on the heavenly talismans. Over the years, he had discovered a set of divine techniques that ordinary people could use from the heavenly talismans. The technique that his disciple had just used was one of them. At this moment, he suddenly felt something. He looked to a direction and saw a Taoist standing there. Behind the Taoist was a 15 or 16-year-old girl. He frowned and said, "Taoist priest Wan Guang?" Wan Guang cupped his hands and said, "Zuyuzhong greets you." Yin Kuang returned the greeting and said in a deep voice, "Taoist priest, have you thought about my last suggestion? All these years, he didn't do anything because he was waiting for Forgotten Li Mountain's reply. Now that Wan Guang had arrived, he thought that Forgotten Li Mountain had made a decision. Wan Guang smiled and didn't answer. He called Lin Ying'er forward and said, "My disciple is going to leave the mountain to train. Please take care of her, Suizhong." Ying Kuang couldn't help but frown when he didn't obtain the answer he wanted. However, when he looked at Lin Ying'er again, he couldn't help but have a thought. He noticed that the latter actually had traces of the Hao clan on her. His thoughts spun like lightning, and he instantly changed his mind. He said, "All right, your disciple will stay with me for now." Chapter 1910. Although the Yanlu kingdom ruled by the 11th prince was a kingdom, it was actually a world of its own. However, since it was under the rule of the heavenly court, it was connected to the universe, and the closest one to it was Shen Sunzhou. A few days ago, 7th Prince Haoqing's trusted aide, Meng Gao. He came here personally. Previously, someone secretly revealed that although the 11th prince did not have any deities under his command, the entire Yanlu kingdom was under his complete control and his gains were not any less than theirs. Moreover, the 11th prince did not have any demon soldiers under his command, which made him a perfect target for them to attack. Therefore, when they asked for offerings, Haoqing did not reply. Since Haoqing was unwilling to give in, they were prepared to use force to force him. However, there was a hindrance here. The Yanlu kingdom was located in a remote area. It was separated by the Boundary River and separated by the Tianyuan Mountains. Unless one had a talisman from the Heavenly Emperor, one would not be able to pass through. Naturally, the 7th prince did not have such a thing. In addition, he had to leave some demon soldiers behind to guard against the other princes. Therefore, he could not launch a large-scale attack and could only send his trusted aide to recruit demons. In the Shunsun Island, there were many demons that had been chased out of the Yanlu kingdom that day, as well as wild demons that had been wandering around the area. These demon soldiers were gathered by Meng Gao, and with the help of the many attendants he brought with him, he managed to gather 100,000 people in just a few days. When Haoqing heard about the commotion here, he immediately summoned Jie Ying for a discussion. Jie Ying said, "Your Highness, although the Yanlu kingdom does not need demon soldiers, all the people in the kingdom can fight for us. Your Highness can recruit as many as you want." Haoqing shook his head and said, "The Yanlu kingdom is a small country with few people. Even if we can repel the enemy, it will definitely hurt our foundation. Even if we can force them to retreat this time, what if they come again?" Jie Ying thought for a while and said, "Your Highness wants to force them to retreat without using weapons?" Haoqing nodded and said, "Official Jie, can you do that?" Jie Ying lowered his head and thought for a while before saying, "Your Highness, please allow me to think about it." After he left, he thought that if he wanted to repel 100,000 demon soldiers led by a celestial general without using weapons, he would have to borrow the power of the mountain. Thus, he ordered someone to find Lin Huaizhan for a discussion. When Lin Huaizhan heard this, he was puzzled. "Martial uncle, why don't you let martial nephew handle this matter? I've seen many of those demons on my way here, but I don't think they have much ability. We can kill them outside the border river." Jie Ying asked, "Can you kill 100,000 demon soldiers in one night?" Lin Huaizhan said, "That's a little difficult. If it's 10 days or half a month, I can give it a try." Jie Ying sighed, 10 days to half a month and we would have already entered the Yanlu kingdom. Moreover, if the 7th prince were to see you, he would definitely ask for help from the Qi practitioners or the celestial officials. You might not even have the chance then. "King," Prince said, "King Huaizhan, and Princes Ming Lin. Kingdom, King Princes King I, Prince I King Kingdom I King," Jie Ying said, "You mean to get rid of the people sent by Prince 7? He shook his head and said, "That's not appropriate. Although the person who came is only a trusted follower of the 7th prince, he must be protected by a divine general. Moreover, he is a divine being himself. If we kill him wantonly, the celestial court will definitely punish us. Even if it's hard to punish us, the Li Wang mountain will still blame you." Lin Huaizhan laughed and said, "But we don't have to get rid of them. Jie heard him and thought for a while before saying, "Then let's give it a try." That night, Lin Huaizhan left Yanlu country. Without identifying the direction, he rushed towards the towering demonic qi and directly came to the enemy's camp. After taking a careful look above the camp, he found that there were indeed immortal generals guarding the camp. However, the defense was unusually lax. Lin Huaizhan was a little confused. In reality, although the princes were competing with each other, it was only the demon soldiers killing each other. No one dared to do anything to the immortal officials or divine generals. Otherwise, the heavenly court would definitely punish them. Currently, no one dared to cross this boundary, so there was no need to be on guard against them. Moreover, Meng Gao was only here on 7th Prince's order to preside over the attack. He was not the prince himself. Even if he was dead, another person could be sent to replace him. Meng Gao himself was not that important, so it was impossible to have too many guards. When Lin Huaizhan saw this, he suddenly felt a little more confident. He avoided the main camp and came to the foot of a small hill. He took out an incense burner and lit it. The smoke drifted in the air and condensed into the shape of a little monkey. It looked very intelligent. He whispered a few instructions, and the little monkey seemed to have understood. It squeaked a few times at him, and with a flash, it scuttled into the camp. About 4 hours later, the little monkey came back. It left empty-handed but came back with a pouch. From the shape, it was obvious that it was used by the Heaven Court. Lin Huaizhan was overjoyed. He patted the little monkey's head and kept it in the incense burner. He did not alert the demon soldiers. Instead, he quietly returned to Yanlu Kingdom and reported the matter to Jie. Jie was surprised. "I didn't expect martial nephew to succeed. If the enemy retreats, you will be the main contributor." Lin Huaizhan said, "This item has an owner but I can't open it. I don't know if it is that item." Jiang nodded. "Don't worry. We will know in 2 days." However, they did not expect that on the second day, Shen Sunzhou's reply was already a mess. The reason why the disciples were able to recruit the demons was not because of their status as princes, but because they promised enough blood food and goods as a reward. These goods were carried by Meng Gao, which was what Gao Lin and Huaizhan took away that night. According to the rules, these items should be placed separately. This way, even if they were stolen, they would not disappear completely. The missing parts could be retrieved from the rear. However, Meng Gao wanted to save trouble and put them all in one place. This caused the demons to be unwilling to follow his orders. After discovering this, he knew that he would definitely be punished and executed by the 7th Prince if he returned, so he simply abandoned the camp and left. When the immortal generals saw this, they felt that there was no need to stay any longer, so they all retreated. The 100,000 demon soldiers had no one to restrain them and they had no blood to feed on, so they dispersed in a hubbub, and the disaster disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan watched the changes in the world from within the realm of forgetfulness. Just as Lin Huaizhan was resolving the crisis, he saw the Emperor's qi on the 11th Prince's body suddenly increase. The main reason was that the 11th Prince did not reveal his true strength. Hence, the other princes only thought that he was lucky and did not think that he had much strength. He looked in the direction of the heavenly court. As he placed his piece, the disciples of his sect gradually entered into the karma of this place. The scene in front of him became clearer and clearer. Now, he could faintly see a light in the world. Although he could not distinguish it clearly, he was able to see some things. Just as he had guessed, the heavenly court had an item, but they could not control it. This was the item that many spirit refinement cultivators wanted, or a part of it. No matter which Dao vein was recognized by the heavenly court, they would also have the right to possess this item. Once the true body paid attention to it, they could take it away. This was the origin of the battle between the Dao of integrity and the Dao of virtue. However, these powerful cultivators were only a strand of consciousness. They did not know when the true body would pay attention to it. Hence, before that, they could only try their best to ensure that the item fell into their hands. He could sense that this item was also very important to him. Although it was difficult to know what it was, It was very likely that it would be an indispensable part of his Tao path in the future. As such, he had to fight for it. However, it was a pity that even though his power could suppress these consciousnesses, if he directly chased them away, he would alert the true body behind him. Hence, he could only slowly plan for it. Thankfully, after knowing all this, he had sorted out his thoughts. In the future, he would no longer need to fumble around and take things one step at a time. Instead, he could act freely. The first thing he needed to do was to do what the other powerful cultivators had planned and try to push a prince onto the throne. But from the looks of it, apart from the 11th prince, there was no other suitable candidate. His gaze landed on the state of Yen Lu. Among the princes, someone had actually chosen the 11th prince, who appeared to be the weakest and was the furthest away. There was definitely someone behind this. He secretly thought that this was very likely Quan Dao's doing. They probably thought that the 11th prince could stand on the stage now and that he could share some of the pressure for Quan Dao. Quan Dao probably felt that if he told him directly, there might not be any results, so he used this method. He thought about it. This time, the problem had been resolved. However, if they were not willing to give up, he might use other methods. Although the fact that he supported the 11th prince would be exposed sooner or later, he had to pay attention to the timing. At the very least, he had to choose the right time and not be forced to appear. Hence, he had to find some trouble for this person and let him know that he had his own way of doing things and that he did not need anyone to interfere. In the Apricot continent, the second prince, Hao Ji, had previously offended the Forgottenly Mountain and lost all his demon soldiers. Moreover, he had occupied the best piece of land among the many fiefs. Hence, the other princes naturally would not miss this opportunity. While he was weak, they continuously sent demon soldiers to attack him. Among them was the third prince, whom Quan Dao thought highly of. In order to deal with the invasion of the princes, Hao Ji also had to attend to one thing and lose sight of another. Fortunately, he had the help of a perfected immortal sent by Dao. Not long after, they set up a barrier of the heavenly river at the border, which resolved the crisis. Just as he was trying to recover his strength, a crack appeared on the barrier for some reason. The direction of the heavenly river coincidentally led to the third prince's fief. The third prince did not hesitate to lead his army in. However, Hao Ji was much more relaxed when dealing with the enemies along the way. After a few battles, no one gained the upper hand. Instead, both sides suffered heavy losses. At this time, the other princes saw that the third prince seemed to have an opportunity and attacked him simultaneously. Seeing this, Hao Ji gloated over the third prince's misfortune and did not let him go. This caused the third prince to become the target of everyone. For a moment, he was badly battered and had no choice but to seek help from Quan Dao. It was not difficult for Quan Dao's two grand elders to understand the reason for this. In order to resolve this matter, after a discussion, one of them once again came to the Forgottenly Mountain. Chapter 1911. When Zhang Yan sensed that Quan Dao had returned, he opened the door and welcomed him in. After greeting him, he invited him to take a seat and said, "What brings you here today?" The Taoist replied, "I'm here to discuss the succession of the heavenly the Arch." The third prince was currently in a precarious situation and Quan Dao understood the reason behind it. Hence, he had returned to resolve this matter. Furthermore, in order to prevent an even bigger conflict in the future, he had decided not to reveal too much of his plan to the third prince. Zhang Yan also understood the meaning behind his words and asked directly, "Who do you have in mind?" The Taoist bowed and said, "The third prince can be the heavenly the Arch." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Originally, the third prince was indeed the person he wanted to choose, but the 11th prince was another choice. In fact, they were on par with each other. However, now that the 11th prince was entrusted to him, the 11th prince was naturally second. Today, the Taoist came to confirm with him that the third prince would be the leader and the 11th prince could give up at any time. He would not agree to this. Furthermore, he did not believe that Quan Dao really had no other choices. Since the Taoist did not speak to him, it meant that the Taoist still had reservations about him. Hence, he pondered for a while and said, The mysteries of the heavens are chaotic, and the emperor's aura is not clear. Everyone should rely on their own luck. What he meant was to maintain the status quo. There was no need to decide who would be the leader and who would be the second. The person who could walk to the end would naturally be the most suitable one. His suggestion was actually correct, and Quan Dao obviously knew that as well. However, what he wanted was the right to be the leader. He hoped that Zhang Yan would cooperate with him and not start from scratch. His answer was obviously not satisfactory to the Taoist. The Taoist said, "Previously, I heard that the Taoist of virtue had sent a disciple to your mountain. If you have any trouble, you can tell me." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's no big deal. It's just some threats. I will not care if they want me to be under their wings." The Taoist was silent for a while before saying, "Since Taoist has an objection to the selection of the emperor, we can discuss it after the heavenly mystery is clear." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. The other party had clearly taken a step back. The meaning behind this was that since they had different opinions, there was no need to insist on a result. They could put the matter aside for now and wait for the situation to change before making a decision. This was exactly what he had expected. Quan Dao would not shed all pretense of cordiality with him for now, because he did not want to lose him as an ally. Even if they could not be on good terms, they could not be on bad terms, especially under the premise that the Dao also seemed to have the intention to recruit him. It would be unwise to push him to the side of morality and Dao. Of course, he had his own considerations. He would definitely not enter the path of virtue. This was something that these two obviously did not know. At this time he said, "Virtue and Taoism are our generation's great enemy. I think that we can reconcile on the big and discuss on the small." The Taoist thought for a while and nodded in agreement. Then he said, "The second Prince Hao Ji is someone that the German country favors. We should not act rashly. We should first cut off the weak branches and leaves before deciding on the main branch." Zhang Yan said, "This is exactly what I want." Although it was a battle between the princes, those who had the support of the Grand Supreme would not be easily defeated. For example, this time, the 11th prince did not even need to move a single soldier to resolve the attack easily. If it was someone else, they would not be able to deal with it so easily. Since that was the case, they could only go around these tough opponents first and defeat the rest before comparing who was stronger. If they attacked someone like the second prince right from the start, Dao would definitely protect him with all his might. Once they started, it would be difficult to stop. Following closely behind, the disciples of the two lineages would definitely enter the fray. In the end, it might even cause the Grand Supreme to personally enter the fray. This kind of thing had to be avoided as much as possible. Even if they really had to fight, it couldn't happen too early. The Taoist got Zhang Yan's approval and said, "The matter of the throne concerns my future worshippers. We have to be careful. My disciple Zhong Quanzi is in charge of the daily affairs of the sect. When the time comes, he will come and discuss this matter with you." The Grand Supreme usually only decided on the general situation. When it came to detailed matters, they would be handled by the sect. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I will also instruct my disciples to cooperate with your sect." The Taoist saw that he had more or less achieved his goal. After a few more polite words, he left. Zhang Yan thought for a while and then called out in his mind. Not long after, Dan Tian, Xiuguang, Yiguang, Qingguang, and Dingguang, 6 sword-bearing disciples came to the hall. Once they entered, they bowed to him and called him Patriarch. Zhang Yan said, "The celestial emperor's position is about to change. All the princes are fighting for it. If the Forgottenly Mountain wants to be the orthodox sect, we must choose one to support. The 11 princes have the emperor's aura and are open-minded. They are not bound by the rules. They can be used by us. Xiuguang, Qingguang, Yiguang, the 3 of you go down the mountain and protect him." The 3 bowed and accepted the order. He then gave a few instructions to Dan Tian, Yiguang, and Dingguang. Then, he gave them some magical weapons and let them go down the mountain to do what they wanted. After Dan Tian went down the mountain, he said goodbye to his fellow disciples and went to the Dazhou kingdom alone. Not long after, he found a tall rampart halfway up the West Shang Path's Baiju Mountain. He landed on the open space in front of the rampart and walked in without looking at the guards. Left Imperial Minister Ying Kuang was sitting behind a table and seemed to be reading something. He noticed someone came in and looked up. When he saw it was Dan Tian, there was no surprise on his face. He nodded and said, "Taoist, please take a seat. There is tea beside the table. Please forgive me for being slow." Dan Tian didn't stand on ceremony and sat down at the side. He said, "Left Imperial Minister is famous across the heavens, but he still stays in the same place. Are you really not afraid of the Celestial Court's attack?" Ying Kuang quickly wrote something. After a while, he put down the brush and looked up. He sat up straight and said with a sharp gaze, "The more the better. I'm just afraid that this person won't come." Over the years, he relied on the heavenly talisman to defeat the Celestial Court many times. His reputation grew, and he even protected many immortal officials who violated the law of heaven. Furthermore, he had done something else. After these immortal officials were stripped of their immortal records, they lost their divine abilities and techniques. They were no different from ordinary people. When they died, they were destined to fall into the underworld. This was unbearable to them unless they turned to cultivating Tao techniques. However, it was very difficult because cultivation couldn't be achieved in a day. If one didn't start cultivating at a young age, it would be difficult to achieve much. However, he had the heavenly talisman in his hand. He could let them cultivate the divine techniques derived from the celestial book. After they died, he could use the heavenly talisman to protect them and prevent them from falling into the underworld. This was something these immortal officials couldn't refuse. Not only that, he also won over many mortal imperial emperors. These country emperors didn't have the guts to overthrow the celestial court. However, on one hand, they wanted to live forever. On the other hand, they were quite dissatisfied with the immortals who demanded too much. They would be happy to see someone find trouble with this person. On the surface, he didn't establish any big force. However, he secretly controlled a lot of power. At this moment, he stared at Dandy Guang and said, "Taoist, are you here to remind me, or is there something else?" Dandy Guang chuckled and said, "Whatever Zui Yuzhong wants to do, go ahead and do it. I just want to remind you that if you want to change the immortals, you can't be too hasty. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to do anything." Ying Kuang's heart shook. He took a deep breath and knew that the time he waited for was finally here. With the heavenly talisman, he didn't need to fear the celestial lords in terms of strength. However, without the support of a supreme, he was just a slightly bigger ant. Tao of virtue helped him get the heavenly talisman. However, Celestial Emperor didn't care and didn't take back the heavenly talisman. It seemed that Ying Kuang still had some use for him. Thus, he could only rely on the other Grand Elder to continue fulfilling his ambitions. Li Wang Mountain was willing to support him, so this worry was gone. He said seriously, "Taoist, don't worry. There are billions of immortals in the world. How can I kill them all? Even if I can, it will be my disciples' problem." Dandy Guang said, "It's good that Zui Yuzhong knows. What do you plan to do after descending?" Ying Kuang said, "The princes are fighting for the throne. The heavens are not at peace and the realms are not at peace. The people of the lower realms are not the only ones affected. Qi cultivators are also affected. I want to find all the cultivators in the world to work together." After all, he was the Zui Yuzhong. He knew that he couldn't get rid of the immortals by himself. He had to rely on other forces. After the princes went to their fiefdoms, they fought with each other and killed Qi cultivators. On one hand, the celestial heavens didn't have good intentions towards these people who didn't follow orders. On the other hand, Celestial Emperor wanted to kill some major forces before the throne was passed down. These people were his potential allies. He started doing this a long time ago. After descending, not only did he save the mortals, he made a name for himself. He also visited famous itinerant immortals and promised that if he could overthrow the celestial heavens, he would kill the immortals and spread the Tao. Of course, he knew that these people wouldn't just listen to him, but at least some of them could be won over to his side. Dandy Guang looked at him and smiled. "Since Zui Yuzhong already has a plan, I will wait and see." After Grand Elder Quan Dao visited Mount Li Wang, the third prince's troubles quickly subsided. However, he also lost a lot of vitality and needed to recover. The other princes also lost a lot in this battle. Seeing that they didn't have any more chances, they all retreated and silently gathered their strength. Similarly, the 11th prince also used this rare period of peace to organize the affairs of the kingdom and tried his best to strengthen the kingdom. In the Qingtai continent, the 7th prince had forcefully seized a lot of offerings and used them to recruit more demon soldiers. He had also used the help of the Heavenly Mother to transfer some of the Heaven Court's officials and heavenly generals who had violated the heavenly law to his side. His strength had increased tremendously. However, he had learned his lesson after suffering a loss. Seeing that no one was moving, he did not move. This silence lasted for 10 years. However, this period of peace was short. When he felt that he had recovered, the 9th prince was the first one who couldn't take it anymore. He led 1,000,000 demon soldiers across the Boundary River and charged towards the 8th prince. At the same time, many of the Supreme Sect's subordinates also descended. Everyone knew that after this battle, even if they couldn't fight for the throne, the outcome would be clear. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.